Chapter 1740. The more the spear went on, the more shocked Lei Dingtian became. This was because things seemed to have completely exceeded his expectations. Xiao Yang's spear technique was not weak either. In fact, it could even somewhat suppress Lei Dingtian's ferocity. Xiao Yang's spear only looked like a coincidence. In fact, its strength was still very terrifying. In this short period of time, Lei Dingtian's hands were already a little numb from the shock. It could be said that he was in great pain. This was even more unexpected to him. He did not expect the opponent's strength to be so strong. It was not at all like King Wu's level 8 existence. However, Lei Dingtian was sure that Xiao Yang was King Wu's level 8 realm. After coming to the tomb of the god of sin, it was even more impossible for him to break through rashly. Therefore, the change in the situation was even more difficult to figure out. There were too many mysteries in this, making it impossible for people to figure out the key points in a short period of time. It was very frustrating. It could be said that it was the first time Lei Dingtian had such a hard time hunting someone who was lower than him. Even if he was at the same level, he had never spent so much effort and time. While he was worrying, Lei Dingtian increased the strength in his hands. Now that he had exerted his full strength, he wanted to see how long Xiao Yang could hold on. Little did he know that Xiao Yang was getting braver as the fight went on. Even when facing Lei Dingtian's full strength, he still did not retreat or show any fear. There was not even a hint of weakness. They were still evenly matched. This kind of overbearing fighting style of exchanging injury for injury could be said to be suicidal. Perhaps it was just a matter of who was tougher between the two of them. One had to say that such a fight was a great test of one's mind and willpower. If there was a little carelessness or a little weakness in one's mentality, one would most likely be defeated. Lei Dingtian was also aware of this. However, how could such a situation occur where one's heart was? After more than 100 spears, both of them could be said to be covered in wounds. There were bloodstains everywhere. It was a tragic sight. However, most of them were superficial wounds. There were only a few wounds that were so deep that the bones could be seen. Lei Dingtian's heart was even more shocked. He felt that if this stalemate continued, there might be some unexpected changes. Therefore, he had to change his way of thinking to avoid any unexpected problems. For some reason, Lei Dingtian felt a little flustered and scared. Immediately, he feinted his spear and quickly retreated. Only then did he put some distance between himself and Xiao Yang so that they would not continue fighting. On the other hand, Xiao Yang did not take advantage of his opponent's retreat to pursue him. At the same time, he also quickly retreated a few steps, seemingly trying to widen the distance between them. This seemingly inexplicable retreat did not seem to make any sense. However, that was not the case. Lei Dingtian had feigned a retreat with his spear, but he still had a counterattack. If Xiao Yang had rashly pursued him, he might have really fallen for it. Both of them had very high attainments in spear arts, so they were able to see many clues from each other's movements. Lei Dingtian's plan did not succeed. He also sighed. As expected, their thoughts were similar, so it was difficult for them to plot against each other. "You are indeed powerful, but this ends here," Lei Dingtian said coldly. At this point, he could no longer maintain his calm and composed smile. This was because he felt that the current situation was no longer under his control. Therefore, he had to end this quickly. If this were to drag on any longer, then it was really possible that they would fail miserably. On the other hand, Xiao Yang shook the silver spear in his hand and maintained an indifferent expression. However, in his heart, he knew that the previous battle was just a warm-up. Next, he was going to decide the victor with one move. Everything was going according to Xiao Yang's plan. This made him feel that his chances of winning had suddenly increased. Suddenly, his heart was filled with joy. When Lei Dingtian saw that Xiao Yang suddenly revealed a trace of joy, he muttered in his heart, "What is going on?" Immediately, Lei Dingtian forced himself to convince himself that it was just a trick to confuse him. Was he trying to use this to disturb his mentality? In the next moment, Lei Dingtian no longer hesitated. With a low growl, he quickly waved the spear in his hand, opening and closing wide. Since he was going to decide the victor with one move, there was naturally nothing to hesitate about. This was because he was indeed feeling a little exhausted right now. If the stalemate continued, the originally impossible defeat was very likely to happen. When the spear was unleashed, the sound of wind and thunder could be heard incessantly. It was very violent. In an instant, Lei Dingtian's robe was fluttering, especially the lightning embroidered on his robe. Now, it was as if it had come alive and was constantly flowing into the spear in his hand. Xiao Yang laughed coldly. Indeed, it was similar to what he had expected. Now that Lei Dingyin realized that something was wrong, he decided to use the last move to decide the victor. He was not willing to fall behind. With a low growl, the silver spear in his hand trembled vigorously. Countless thunderbolts continuously burst out, almost wrapping around his entire body. It was a spectacular sight. The treasured sword in the sky and the thundercloud were still chasing each other. The thundercloud seemed to have felt the fluctuation in its master's mood and became even more restless. Thousand poison thunder dragon roar. Xiao Yang growled. Although he started to accumulate power a little later, he was the first to attack. The thunder dragon roared out, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, as if it was pouring out its power to its heart's content. Wind thunder roar. Following Lei Dingtian's growl, at this moment, a majestic spear intent also surged out at this moment. It was like a completely primitive beast. Wherever the iron hooves passed, it could be said to be unrecognizable. Even the originally damaged flying ship trembled violently. Obviously, it was also afraid of the power of this move. It was as if it was going to completely collapse in the next moment. It was very terrifying. The thunder dragon quickly collided with the majestic spear intent. Suddenly, the thunder dragon also roared continuously. Its power was constantly being weakened. However, the thunder dragon did not directly collapse under such circumstances. Instead, it continued to move forward with its remaining power. After Lei Dingtian used the wind thunder roar, he was a little exhausted and could not move at all. Of course, his breath had been completely locked, and there was no way for him to dodge. However, in his opinion, there was no need for him to dodge at all. The reason was very simple. He was bathing in the thunder pool when he had nothing to do. What was there to be afraid of when the power of thunder and lightning had been weakened to the point where it was almost useless? No matter how powerful the move was or how extraordinary the insight was, it would not be able to do anything to him. Chapter 1741. The Thunder Dragon arrived in front of Lei Dingtian in the blink of an eye. It penetrated his body and began to move at an extremely fast speed. It was ferocious and powerful. However, Lei Dingtian stood there unmoved. He let the Thunder Dragon continue to wreak havoc in his body. He did not move. It was as if nothing had happened. Lei Dingtian even enjoyed the feeling. He felt that it was no different from his usual baths. Of course, the power of the thunder dragon roar of 1,000 poisons was not to be underestimated. However, under the weakening of the wrath of wind and thunder, it was no longer as powerful as before. In addition, Lei Dingtian would bathe in the thunder pool whenever he was free. He was almost immune to the remaining damage. Now, Lei Dingtian felt that Xiao Yang did not seem to be as smart as he had imagined. Or rather, it could be said that there was a flaw in his plan. He was a cultivator of the 1,000 Thunder realm. Yet, Xiao Yang still used Thunder attribute martial arts to deal with him. Was there something wrong with his brain? On the other hand, Xiao Yang was no longer as indifferent as before. His expression had become extremely serious, because he could sense how intense the murderous intent within it was. If he was really hit by this attack, he would be half dead if not dead. However, Xiao Yang was prepared for this. So what if the wrath of wind and thunder was one of Lei Dingtian's 3 ultimate skills? Right now, he was extremely determined to endure this wave of attacks. Otherwise, there would be no future for him. In an instant, Xiao Yang's mind turned. The remaining power of the airship also burst out at this time. It immediately formed a shield in front of him. Immediately, the internal defensive array collapsed. Under the fierce spear intent, it could be said to be unable to withstand a single blow and would shatter with a single touch. This seemed to be within Xiao Yang's expectations. Therefore, he did not retreat half a step. He still stood there as steady as Mount Tai. Now that the last of the Thunder Dragon's power had been completely exhausted, Lei Dingtian was also standing there, looking unscathed. However, when he looked at Xiao Yang, who was ready for battle, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. All of this was about to end. Xiao Yang's strength was almost exhausted, so he naturally couldn't block this move. Even though this move was unable to completely eliminate Xiao Yang's vitality, it was sufficient to cause him to directly lose the ability to fight. In this way, the following matters would be much simpler. Suddenly, the Tianqin mountain appeared and fiercely blocked the spear that was like a swarm of locusts. However, it was still very strenuous. He retreated abruptly and even showed signs of collapsing. However, it had to be known that the Heavenly Qin Mountain was a genuine saint-level artifact. Now, even it was somewhat unable to withstand it. It was enough to see how terrifying the power of this move was. In an instant, the sound of explosions rang out continuously. Those were the sounds of explosions on the Heavenly Qin Mountain. Many places had already begun to explode. Xiao Yang looked at the Heavenly Qin Mountain that was on the verge of collapse and immediately took a deep breath and used all his strength. This was also the moment that would determine his life and death. How could he be negligent? In an instant, countless protective artifacts continuously overflowed with light. What he wanted was to protect himself with all his might to ensure that he could survive. Soon after, the enormous Heavenly Zither Mountain suddenly disappeared. If he didn't remove the Heavenly Qin Mountain, Xiao Yang believed that it wouldn't take long for it to collapse. Therefore, this method was much more reliable. It would not be like the flying ship, where its grade would drop due to excessive damage. Without the obstruction of the Heavenly Qin Mountain, the spear will immediately surged out like a flood that had broken through a dam. It was unstoppable. Xiao Yang stood there, allowing the spear will of wind and thunder to continuously bombard his body. He was as immovable as a mountain. Countless strange lights rose and fell one after another, and the sound of artifacts shattering could be heard incessantly. Under Xiao Yang's feet, there were countless fragments of artifacts that kept falling. Under such an intense attack, what could possibly withstand it? However, Xiao Yang did not feel the slightest bit of heartache. After all, compared to his own life, he was still very clear about what was more important. The spear will of wind and thunder continued to bombard him, and at the same time it was constantly being consumed. With a crack, even Xiao Yang's heaven-level Imperial Heaven Tower collapsed at this moment. It was an extreme pity that a heaven-level Imperial Heaven Tower collapsed just like that. However, Xiao Yang could not care about that now. After all, he could find another Imperial Heaven Tower if he lost it, but if he lost it, it would really be gone. Although the Imperial Heaven Tower had accompanied him for a long time, he could not care about it now. Suddenly, the remaining power poured directly onto Xiao Yang's body. His breath was also directly crushed, and countless power continued to pass through his body. It could be said that it was a tragic sight. However, Xiao Yang did not retreat even an inch. Even after everything had calmed down, he still stood there, allowing his body to be covered in wounds. In fact, there were many places where one could even see the white bones on his body. In this regard, he was still indifferent. He did not move at all, as if there was no life left in him. The sword flying in the sky suddenly fell to the ground, stabbing into the ground in front of Xiao Yang's feet. There was no movement, and even the sword light became much dimmer. Looking at Xiao Yang, who did not move, the corner of Lei Dingtian's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. Everything was finally over, and Xiaoyang had finally been defeated by him. Recalling this extremely difficult battle, Lei Dingtian could not help but furrow his brows in silence. It could be said that in this battle he had sacrificed too much. Moreover, he had to admit that Xiaoyang was indeed very amazing. With King Wu's strength of the 8th level, he had been entangled with him for so long, and even forced him to use his 3 ultimate skills. Because of this, he had beaten him until he no longer had the ability to move. Now, Lei Dingtian was almost at the end of his rope. He did not have much spiritual energy to continue the battle. Now, Lei Dingtian felt that it was a pity. If Xiaoyang had not been to the Thousand Thunder Realm, they might have met in the God Realm and become friends. They would not have to fight to the death like this. Immediately, Lei Dingtian waved his hand and the thunder cloud returned to his sleeve. After all, maintaining it consumed a lot of energy. Now that the situation was settled, he felt that he needed to conserve some energy. After resting for a while, Lei Dingtian picked up the wind and thunder spear and walked over step by step. If he did not cut off the head, how could he be at ease? Chapter 1742. Do you really think you've won? If you walk over here like that, you might die. Suddenly, his lifeless eyes flickered. All signs of death were gone, and all that was left was anger. Lei Dingtian stopped in his tracks. He looked at his opponent in disbelief. How could he still have so much strength? Although the sound of the bell was somewhat intermittent, it was still a bell that was being tolled intermittently. It was a majestic sound. Logically speaking, Xiaoyang should be a dying man after eating the wrath of wind and thunder. Even if he was still breathing, it would take him at least half a month to recover. Therefore, Lei Dingtian hesitated. With such confidence, he did not look like a dying man. Lei Dingtian even had the illusion that Xiaoyang still had the strength to continue the fight. Could it be that he was a monster? That his strength was limitless and inexhaustible? You're just an arrow at the end of its flight. Do you think you can scare me away with just one look? Lei Dingtian sneered. However, as soon as he finished speaking, he stopped in his tracks. The distance between the two was only about 10 feet. If it was any other time, it would only be a step away. However, now that he was exhausted, he would not be able to walk that far. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, had an indifferent look on his face. Although his spirit qi had been exhausted, he had recovered some of his strength. He directly lifted his silver spear and walked over step by step. Although each step was very slow and very small, it was still very difficult for him to walk. Every step he took, the wounds in his body would be affected. It was excruciating. However, he did not even frown. He continued to walk forward, as if he was ready to use his remaining strength to kill his opponent. At this moment, Lei Dingtian could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He faintly felt that he seemed to have underestimated this opponent. If he could still walk forward, it might not be as simple as just being mysterious. Now, countless thoughts flashed through Lei Dingtian's mind. Now that Xiaoyang had displayed such a strong aura, it could be that he was really confident. Then come over and give it a try and you'll know. Lei Dingtian pretended to be calm as he swung the spear in his hand. He looked like he was ready to fight another 300 rounds. However, both of them knew that the other's spiritual power was already at the end of its tether. It was simply impossible for them to continue. However, they didn't know what kind of trump card the other party still had, and whether he still had a trump card. The corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled up slightly. Don't you feel that your heart has become sluggish and your 8 extraordinary meridians are numb? As soon as he said that, Lei Dingtian was shocked. He had felt it before, but he always thought it was caused by the baptism of thunder and lightning. However, now that Xiaoyang emphasized it, the situation was different. By the way, your internal organs shouldn't feel any pain now, right? Xiaoyang asked. As soon as this was said, Lei Dingtian also came to a sudden realization. After careful investigation, this was indeed the case. Suddenly he panicked. How could Xiaoyang be so clear about this? Then there was only one possibility, and that was that he did something to it. Nonsense. Lei Dingtian suddenly scolded. However, Xiaoyang didn't say anything else. When he was less than 10 feet away, he roared and thrust the silver spear directly at Lei Dingtian's heart. Lei Dingtian was slightly taken aback by the sudden attack. He quickly retreated, only to find that his speed had slowed down considerably. Even his perception was slowed down because of this, and he couldn't use it well at all. Chi! The silver spear pierced Lei Dingtian's body. However, because he retreated, his heart was saved and his heart wasn't pierced directly. Looking at the blood-stained spearhead, Lei Dingtian's mouth twitched slightly. He felt that this was impossible. How did it become like this? Lei Dingtian also had many questions in his heart. Xiaoyang was only King Wu level 8, so why was he so tenacious? He was a level 9 upper tier. So how could he not be a match for him? How could he be tricked by him? Many thoughts flashed through Lei Dingtian's mind, but most of them were unwillingness. However, he wasn't sure how much strength Xiaoyang still had. If the other party really wanted to fight to the death, then wouldn't his cultivation be gone? He still had a bright future and wanted to revive the Thousand Thunder Palace. How could he fall here? Many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Lei Dingtian wasn't an indecisive person. With a low roar and a wave of his sleeve, the thunder cloud flew out directly and hit Xiaoyang. Immediately, Xiaoyang also placed the silver spear in front of his chest, but he was still knocked back more than 10 feet. Lei Dingtian looked at his opponent and gritted his teeth unwillingly. He didn't expect that he would really be tricked. I didn't expect you to use poison. Lei Dingtian now understood what was going on. Moreover, the level of the poison was not low. Now, he couldn't even calculate when he was tricked. Now, Lei Dingtian finally understood why Xiaoyang would take such a risk. He must have relied on the unknown poison. That was why he was like this. All this while, Xiaoyang had only displayed his powerful fighting strength in front of others, but he had never shown his poison skills. Now, at this critical moment, he had no choice but to do so. It could be said that at the beginning of the hand-to-hand fight, he had quietly covered the spearhead of the silver lightning spear with poison power, making it impossible to guard against. The final 10,000 poison thunder dragon roar was the finishing touch, the deciding move. Now, Lei Dingtian's heart was full of regret. He had calculated everything. But why didn't he calculate that his opponent would use poison? The main reason was that Xiaoyang's fierce combat strength was like a martial artist, constantly meeting force with force, giving people an illusion. I think this poison of yours is very rare. I'll let you live this time. Lei Dingtian growled as he turned around and dashed out of the room. Although the poison was ferocious, Lei Dingtian was still a rank 9 existence after all. Therefore, it was still possible for him to suppress it temporarily. Lei Dingtian left because he didn't want to fight to the death. If he died here, he would be very unwilling. Therefore, he had to play it safe. Of course, the most important thing was that Xiaoyang was only knocked back more than 10 feet, which showed that he still had the strength to fight. Chapter 1743. Xiaoyang did not give chase when he saw Lei Dingtian fleeing into the distance. He stood where he was in a daze, but his murderous intent did not diminish in the slightest. It continued to rampage like a god of death. If anyone dared to approach him now, he would probably throw his spear at them without hesitation, regardless of the outcome. It was not that Xiaoyang did not want to give chase. It was because he was also at the stage of exhaustion. He was only holding on by relying on his strong physical body. He would definitely not be able to catch up if he forced himself to give chase. Therefore, he could only sigh at his inadequacy. He had missed such a good opportunity and could not kill Lei Dingtian with a spear. Moreover, Xiaoyang originally only wanted to force him to retreat. Of course, if the other party was really irrational and wanted to fight to the death, he would not mind accompanying him to the end. At most, he would fight to the death. What was there to refuse? Xiaoyang did not go all out to kill Lei Dingtian for a reason. He did not know if the other party had any tricks up his sleeve. If he was driven to desperation, he might have to pay the price for it. It was better to be safe than sorry and not do such a risky thing. Moreover, Lei Dingtian was the #1 genius of the Thousand Thunder Realm. He was a stunning existence. The Thousand Thunder Palace had probably put all the good stuff in his hands. Moreover, Lei Dingtian was also highly valued by the God Realm because of his family background. Unrivaled God had even mentioned that Lei Dingtian was very likely to join the God Realm. Therefore, even if there were some conflicts, he still had to be careful to avoid them. After all, if that was really the case, then Lei Dingtian would no longer have no power behind him. He would have the entire God Realm behind him. Unless there was something wrong with his head, he would not make an enemy of the God Realm. After sensing that his opponent's aura had completely disappeared, Xiaoyang breathed a sigh of relief. He immediately fell to the ground, kicking up a lot of dust. In fact, he was already at the end of his rope. He did not have the strength to fight anymore. He was only holding on with one breath. This breath could be said to be very long, and he almost could not catch his breath. For Xiaoyang, this battle could be said to be very difficult. The situation was much more severe than every previous life and death battle. If it wasn't for his quick wits, his affinity with lightning due to the thunderclap fruit, and his use of the true meaning manifestation art to forcefully raise his physical realm to the 9th level, he definitely wouldn't have been able to challenge Lei Dingtian in the end. Of course, the deciding factor was still his poison. If he hadn't hidden this move well enough, it would have been very difficult for him to succeed once the other party was on guard. Fortunately, everything had passed without any mishap, and he no longer had to worry about leaving the tomb of the god of sin unwillingly. Xiaoyang did not know what secrets lay in the divine tomb, but from the divine intents passed down from the inscriptions here, he could imagine just how many great powers there were in the past. Otherwise, how could things have turned out this way? Moreover, it was hard to say what kind of opportunities were hidden within. The sword intent and spear intent that Xiaoyang had obtained had already increased his strength by a lot. Moreover, he had also obtained the supreme body refining technique, the true meaning manifestation art. If it wasn't for the opportunities in the tomb of the god of sin, the possibility of Xiaoyang competing with Lei Dingtian outside and forcing him to retreat was very small. It was even impossible to do so. Now, Xiaoyang's heart was getting more and more curious about how many good things there were in the tomb of the god of sin, and how many opportunities he could find along the way. After an unknown period of time, Xiaoyang's body condition stabilized slightly and he had some strength to sit up. He also immediately took several elixirs and began to refine the medicinal power to heal his injuries and restore his spiritual power. In the tomb of the god of sin, if one did not have spiritual power, the situation would be very cruel. Fortunately, the commotion of this battle was big enough that the surrounding cultivators did not want to get into trouble, so they had already fled far away and did not dare to come over to check it out. Otherwise, if he did not die in the hands of Lei Dingtian, he would have fallen into the hands of some people with ulterior motives. After recovering some of his strength, Xiaoyang stood up and shook his hand. Suddenly, countless fragments of magic instruments fell out. Among them, there were quite a number of earth and heaven-grade artifacts that were unable to withstand the powerful attacks and were directly shattered. Looking at the magic instruments that he had collected along the way, he originally wanted to take them back to his team. Now that they were all destroyed, he could not help but feel a little heartache. Even the heaven-level magic instrument, the Imperial Heaven Tower, had been completely shattered and there was no possibility of repairing it. Since then, it had become an ordinary object. It was impossible to say that he did not feel heartache, but in comparison, being able to save his own life was the most important thing. These worldly possessions did not seem so important now. Even the damage to the Tianqin mountain was very serious. If this continued, it would not be directly destroyed, but it might also face the situation of losing its grade. With a wave of his hand, Xiaoyang stored the Tianqin mountain into his acupuncture point and used his own spiritual power to nourish it. It would not be long before it became a complete saint-level magic instrument. It was just that he could not continue to use it during this period of time. After all, if he used it forcefully, the consequences would be unimaginable. Immediately, Xiao Yang rushed out of the airship. Looking at the devastated magic instrument that was full of holes, he sighed helplessly. The price paid for this bitter battle was too high. This pseudo-saint-level magic instrument could only be considered a low-heaven-level magic instrument now. It could not even be compared to an ordinary low-heaven-level magic instrument. Because the airship was different from the Tianqi mountain, it could not be repaired. If he wanted to repair it, he would have to find the original owner of the airship. Immediately, Xiao Yang put it away. After all, this huge object was very conspicuous. I hope that the next time we meet, I won't be in such a sorry state. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly and muttered, then flew into the distance. This was still a place of trouble. After the battle ended, there would be people who would come to investigate over time. If he were to encounter them, he might really get into trouble. Now, leaving this place of trouble was the best choice. Chapter 1744. Somewhere in the tomb of the gods, a man in tattered clothes and disheveled hair sat with his back against the wall. Through the gaps in his hair, one could see that his face was extremely pale. The wounds that were exposed to the outside had begun to turn black. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. That was why there were such signs. Suddenly the man roared in pain. He hammered his fists directly on the ground. Suddenly the entire tomb shook violently. Suddenly a lot of dust flew down. Among the dust there were also many stones that fell, making a pitter-patter sound. Even if those stones hit his body, he did not feel it. This man was Lei Dingtian. After he escaped from the airship, he quickly found a secluded place to settle down. Originally, because he had forcibly suppressed the poison and fled in a panic, it had caused the poison to invade his heart meridian. Now he was in even more pain. Of course, the torture of the heart meridian was still bearable. However, the paralysis of the 8 extraordinary meridians had almost made him lose consciousness. This could be said to be very scary. If he could not move, the slightest accident could take his life. Previously, Lei Dingtian had also taken a few antidote pills, but they didn't seem to have much effect. They couldn't suppress the poison, which made him feel even more helpless. Therefore, Lei Dingtian could only use this method to stimulate his body so that he would not lose the last bit of consciousness. Otherwise, when the time came, if he fell down, it might be permanent. The surrounding death aura seemed to have sensed a delicacy and rushed over crazily. However, it soon stopped, as if it was afraid of something. Suddenly, Lei Dingtian raised his head. Between his eyes, there was a bright light. His face was serious, and the pain from before was gone. "Do you think you are Xiao Yang too?" Lei Dingtian suddenly scolded in a cold voice. After he finished speaking, Lei Dingtian stood up, and the thundercloud slipped out of his sleeve. It laid horizontally in front of him, releasing thunder and lightning as if it was showing off its might. "Haha, I am not Xiao Yang." As he said that, a gloomy voice was heard. A person walked in. This person wore a black robe with a very strange pattern embroidered on it. It looked like a flame, but it didn't look like one. It was blue in color. If one didn't look carefully, it wouldn't be easy to see it under the black background. "Since you are not Xiao Yang, why are you here to challenge me even though I am severely injured?" Lei Dingtian snorted and asked. This was something that Lei Dingtian did not expect. He had just settled down, and someone had already come over so quickly. Obviously, that person didn't have good intentions. Otherwise, why would he be hiding? Although Lei Dingtian's consciousness had become numb, the other party's aura was so strong. How could he not feel it? "Haha, you're just a dragon swimming in the shallows and a tiger on the plains. Even now, you still dare to be so overbearing?" The black-clothed man had a smile on his face, but it gave people a very cold feeling. That smile was like a fake smile. If an ordinary person saw it, they would probably tremble. Lei Dingtian snorted and said, Then are you a shrimp or a dog? Hearing this, the black-clothed man was not angry. Instead, he looked very proud, but it was also very strange. Whether I am a dog or a shrimp, you will become my meal. That's a good thing. The man was still smiling, but there was a hint of malevolence in his smile. Lei Dingtian clenched his fist, and the wind thunder spear appeared in his hand in the blink of an eye. His gaze froze, and his murderous intent was no longer hidden. Since you are not Xiaoyang, what makes you think you can be my enemy? Even if Shenluo was here, he wouldn't dare to be my enemy. Lei Dingtian said coldly. It could be said that Xiaoyang and Shenluo were the strongest among King Wu's rank 8 combat strength. If the sect leader didn't ask us not to participate in the 3rd round of the competition, I'm afraid that Shenluo and Jiang Feiyun would have been eliminated. Of course, that Xiaoyang can't be the champion. The black-clothed man said disdainfully. Hearing the black-clothed man speak so casually, Lei Dingtian seemed to have thought of something, and his brows furrowed again. There were many people in their world who entered the 3rd round, but they all chose to forfeit in the end. Now that he thought about it carefully, it seemed that there was something fishy going on. Suddenly, Lei Dingtian's brows furrowed. Could it be that they were plotting something? An ominous premonition rose in his heart. In the next moment, the black-clothed man did not continue to talk nonsense, and directly pounced on Lei Dingtian aggressively. Almost all the geniuses in the tomb of the god of sin had gained something, and some of them who were blessed by the heavens had even obtained unexpected benefits. For example, Shen Fian from the god world had obtained the sword technique of a sage and comprehended many true meanings. It was only a matter of time before she achieved her strength. Another example was Luo Ku from the Sun Snow world. He had also found a place that was fated with him and was unable to extricate himself from it. In other words, Jade-faced by Jian from the Heaven Sword Realm was even more impressive. He had now begun to comprehend the supreme sword will without any distraction. There were many cultivators who benefited from it, but there were also those who were not so lucky. For example, Lei Dingtian and Shan Wushuang. Although they were both level 9 and had obtained some scattered true meanings, they could not find a complete set of skills. This was the natural law of Tao, and it was indescribably wonderful. Opportunity was all about fate. If one was not fated, even if they walked all over the tomb of the god of sin, they would still end up with nothing. It was a fact that could not be changed. Xiaoyang's luck was not bad either. Although he had only obtained one skill, it was just right, and it gave him a lot of improvement. More importantly, the degree of compatibility was extraordinary. After the battle with Lei Dingtian, Xiaoyang did not know how long had passed. However, he could infer some clues from the recovery of his injuries. More than a month had passed just like that. His injuries were mostly healed, and he could also use 90% of his strength. He had deliberately suppressed his aura along the way, and he was especially restrained. He knew that his poison was enough to entangle Lei Dingtian for a long time, but it was not a long-term solution. Therefore, it was not a problem to be careful. At the same time, he had gained quite a lot. Although he did not obtain a good skill like the 10,000 elephant true meaning skill, he had obtained many divine meanings which benefited him greatly. Chapter 1745. Although these divine intents did not appear to be as powerful as the 10,000 elephant technique, if one could fully comprehend them, then one could improve one's martial arts techniques and make them stronger. Of course, the actual effect was still not as powerful as the technique, but it could subtly change a person. This was the magical effect of the divine intents. Perhaps one might not be able to feel how much improvement it would bring to one, but once it accumulated and was fully comprehended, then the improvement one could get was not just a little bit. It was enough to make a person reborn. For example, Shen Fian's sword will had always been obscure. However, after learning the sword technique in the ancient tomb, her sword will immediately became sharp. Of course, this was also because she was not strong to begin with. That was why she had such a huge improvement. For top existences like Xiaoyang and Shenluo, the divine intents did not provide much help to them. They could only help them find their own shortcomings and make up for them. Of course, this was also a process of improvement. It did not seem like much, but it was very important and would be of great help in the future. Many fortuitous encounters were not something that could be figured out in a short period of time, nor could they be tasted. Xiaoyang walked on this barren land. It did not seem like he was going very fast, but his speed was not slow. It only took him half an hour to travel 100 miles. This pace was neither fast nor slow, but it was enough for him to see if there were any inscriptions around him. If there were, then he would sit down and carefully comprehend them. If there were none, then he would experience the divine intents he had obtained, review them, and comprehend them. Sometimes one step at a time could also be considered cultivation. It just depended on one's thoughts. After the battle with Lei Dingtian, Xiaoyang also realized that although his strength was the best in the world among those of the same level, and he had often challenged those of a higher level in the past, killing too many people who were considered impossible to kill in the eyes of others. However, this time he had suffered a loss. Even though cultivation level was a very important issue from his point of view, he could make up for it with his advantages. However, against Lei Dingtian, he could only make it so that both of them were injured and retreated. Therefore, Xiaoyang had to admit that Lei Dingtian's natural talent was very high and his mentality to kill was not bad either. In the end, if he really didn't leave, then Xiaoyang had the ability to kill him, but the final result might be mutual destruction. Although he didn't have to worry about Lei Dingtian finding trouble with him in the future, it was hard to say after leaving the tomb of the god of sin. Therefore, he still needed to think about his escape route. After walking for a short distance, Xiaoyang saw a huge mountain. That mountain was very strange, because the mountain was like a giant standing there. It was very spectacular. He bent down and stabbed his sword into the ground. Only then was he able to stabilize himself and not fall to the ground. Unfortunately, this strange mountain had experienced countless years, and under the invasion of the aura of death, it was completely unrecognizable. It was extremely blurry, and only a rough outline could be seen. Upon closer inspection, Xiaoyang also discovered that there were traces of spirit qi circulating in the mountain, which was truly a rare thing. However, in the tomb of the god of sin, there was an endless aura of death, and there was no trace of spirit qi at all. The spirit qi also seemed to be sealed in the mountain, but now it had become very weak. It probably wouldn't be long before it completely collapsed. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang sighed helplessly. He remembered the rumors of the tomb of the god of sin, that it used to be a battlefield. The sages of the god of sin and the foreign tribes fought here. In the end, there were heavy losses, and in the end, not even 1 out of 10 survived. The gods' tablet inscriptions left in the tomb of the god of sin were engraved by the mighty people with their vital qi at the last moment of their death in order to continue their legacy. Presumably, the sages who left these behind did not expect the end result. Because of their great battle, the tomb of the god of sin eventually became lifeless, and it was difficult for people to enter. After circling for a long time, Xiaoyang did not find any inscriptions, but his heart was already in awe. This was because this mighty person most likely died in the battle and did not have time to leave behind his legacy before he died in such a way. It must be some kind of secret method that turned him into this stone mountain. After bowing to the stone mountain, Xiaoyang continued to move forward. When Xiaoyang walked a short distance, the last trace of spirit qi in the stone mountain seemed to have been completely exhausted. It suddenly collapsed, turning into countless stones, and fell to the ground one after another. With a rumbling sound, dust flew up. A ray of clear light directly went behind Xiaoyang. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's whole body shook. The weak spirit qi was as fast as the wind, and from time to time, it merged into his sea of consciousness. In an instant, a sense of clarity spread through his body, as if at this time, everything became clear. What entered his eyes was no longer dark and obscure, but incomparably clean. However, this state only lasted for less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea. When Xiaoyang came back to his senses again, everything had been settled and peace was restored. The gray sky also appeared in front of his eyes at the same time. What a good heart integrated into sword, but it's a pity that too much time has passed, so what was left behind? Xiaoyang said, then shook his head and stopped talking. The spirit qi sealed in the stone mountain was the legacy left by that mighty person. It was a pity that too much time had passed, and by now it was not enough to reach the apex. If it was given to an ordinary person, it would naturally be of great benefit, and it would even be possible to cultivate to the level of King Wu. However, the current Xiaoyang had already reached the 8th rank, so his gains were very small. But that little feeling also made Xiao Yang's point of view on swordsmanship change a little, but he was still unaware of it. Xiao Yang did not care about these gains and losses, so he turned around and bowed again before leaving. After all, he had received a favor from others, so he still had to have a little etiquette. Although it was inevitable that he felt a little regretful, it was also something that could not be helped. After all, the divine intent and spirit qi on the inscription were not the same. Moreover, spiritual qi was suppressed here to begin with. If that mighty person was not in the tomb of the god of sin, this legacy might really not have decayed. There was no vitality in the tomb of the god of sin, and it was full of death aura. It could be seen how tragic the battle was, and the injuries were already so severe. Chapter 1746. The past could be said to be too long ago. Even if one wanted to investigate it, one would not be able to deduce much due to the lack of clues. One could only find some clues from the ruins. However, that was all. Whether it was accurate or not was another matter. It was hard to be certain. Xiao Yang did not think too much and continued to move forward towards the center of the Tomb of the Gods. Rumor had it that the center of the Tomb of the Gods was where the opportunities gathered. However, it was difficult for him to be sure that he was going in the right direction. After all, when he landed, he did not know where he was. Later on, he fought with Lei Dingtian and fled in a panic. He could not tell where he was. In addition, the Tomb of the Gods was originally gray and murky. The aura of death was everywhere. It was still difficult to deduce the correct path. Therefore, he could only move forward based on his feelings. If the direction he walked in had opportunities that belonged to him, then it was his fate. This was naturally the case for cultivation methods and opportunities. Sometimes, even if you unintentionally chose a path, if you were lucky enough, you might be able to gain a lot. However, this was difficult to determine. It all depended on one's luck. Moreover, the Tomb of the Gods was a very strange place. You would never know what was the right choice. Xiao Yang did not care so much. However, along the way, he also felt that he still had a lot of opportunities. Even if he only received some divine intent, it was still not bad. Therefore, he only needed to move forward. If he encountered a stone tablet, he could just sit down. However, how much he could get depended on fate. Along the way, Xiao Yang did not receive many opportunities. However, it was better than nothing. However, his cultivation of the 8th level became more and more solid. It was purer than before when he was at the same level. In this dark world, because there were strangers entering, it seemed to have some vitality. However, some cultivators also began to change. They were either seriously injured or possessed by their inner demons. There were changes inside, but it was only a small number of people. Suddenly, Xiao Yang felt an extremely powerful aura fluctuation around him. Waves after waves of aftershocks constantly surged out. Suddenly, Xiao Yang raised his eyebrows slightly. Sure enough, everyone in the Tomb of the God of Sin was fighting for opportunities, and no one was willing to give in. That was why there was a conflict. Of course, there was another possibility, and that was that if there was a conflict outside, it would be difficult to fight in the God realm. But in here, they could do whatever they wanted. This was very normal. For example, the relationship between Xiao Yang and Lei Dingtian was like this. Originally, Xiaoyang didn't want to get involved, but he felt that the aftershock of power between the two was a little strange. This was because the shock waves from the battle between the two of them were mixed with two different types of power. However, there was no such shock wave. It was as if it was one-sided. Unable to suppress the curiosity in his heart, Xiaoyang concealed himself and raised his head to look. He saw a man in a white robe who was fighting with a ball of black fog. The man in the white robe was also pouring his power on the black fog. However, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. It was silent. As for the overflowing power, it was constantly spreading in all directions. Obviously, the man in the white robe was fighting with the dead spirit. However, the dead spirit had been secretly taking advantage of the time and place to absorb the surrounding aura of death. That was why the situation was like this. As for the man in the white robe, he couldn't continue because he didn't know how to do it. Therefore, he was constantly suppressed. There were no wounds on his body, but he was also surrounded by the aura of death. Obviously, he didn't know that he had been tricked. Xiaoyang also sighed helplessly. If it was a normal battle, he wouldn't have intervened. After all, what did other people's disputes have to do with him? However, he couldn't just stand by and watch his fellow cultivator get tricked by evil methods. Therefore, he had to intervene. Previously, when he met Xin Fian, it was the same when he met Ji Fei. Therefore, Xiaoyang wouldn't just stand by and watch. A red and white sword immediately appeared in his hand. "Get out of the way!" Xiaoyang shouted and rushed over with his sword. The man in the white robe was suddenly stunned. However, at this time he was tricked again. The black fog kept pouring into his body. The man in the white robe shouted. Suddenly, the power in his body exploded. Suddenly, all the qi surged out of his body. Only then did the black fog stop corroding him. With this slight delay, Xiaoyang had already arrived. He directly grabbed the person's back with one hand and violently threw him back. At the same time, he also slashed out with his sword. Immediately, a huge fiery sword qi slashed down like a raging fire, directly cutting the black fog into two. Xiaoyang didn't look back. He just stared at the black fog that was recovering at an extremely fast speed. Suddenly, he frowned slightly. This was because he saw the true body of the dead spirit. It was a person's divine soul. Presumably, it was a cultivator who had fallen here. Under the attack of the death qi, this situation was created. The death qi continued to gather, and the black fog also gathered together. The speed was so fast that it was hard to understand. In the tomb of the god of sin, the dead spirit had a natural advantage. If one couldn't kill it with absolute strength, it could almost be said to be in an immortal state. After being hit by the sword, the black fog quickly recovered. It could be said that it was unscathed. It was very strange. Xiaoyang sneered. He really did have a way to deal with the dead spirit. Moreover, the thunder, fire divine sword in his hand could be said to be the nemesis of these dead spirits. Plunder like fire! Xiaoyang shouted and slashed with his sword. Suddenly, countless flames turned into sword qi and rushed directly toward the black fog. Suddenly, the black fog seemed to want to escape, but it was too late. Countless sword qi poured down on its body and completely locked the huge black fog. It couldn't dodge and it couldn't escape. The sword qi of fire continued to burn the black fog, killing it completely, revealing the divine soul. Xiaoyang didn't hesitate at all. The sword in his hand directly penetrated the body of the dead spirit. Suddenly, countless flames rose. The dead spirit was struggling wildly, trying to escape. However, it couldn't escape at all. It was as if it was nailed. No matter how its body twisted, it could only be covered in flames. If it was a fellow cultivator, Xiaoyang would save it. However, once it was completely reduced to a dead spirit, it could only die early and be reincarnated. Chapter 1747. In an instant, the divine soul of the undead spirit was completely incinerated, and the death qi was no longer attached to it. So it dissipated. After killing the dead spirit, Xiaoyang suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked up as if he had discovered something. With a low shout, he flew over with his sword in hand. In the blink of an eye, he arrived on top of a small hill 10 kilometers away. However, there was nothing there. It was still barren, but he noticed a detail. Someone had been sitting here for quite some time and had used their cultivation. Otherwise, it would be impossible for such obvious traces to be left behind. Moreover, when he left, he was in a hurry, so he did not destroy these traces. He probably did not have time, so he did this. Xiaoyang shook his head. Looking at these traces, he was a little puzzled. The dead spirit was stubborn. Could it be that someone could control it? Although it was said that the world was vast and filled with all sorts of strange things, there were still very few methods that could control the dead spirits. It could even be said that it was uncommon. Moreover, this kind of method was despised by people. After a while, the white-robed man caught up. He cupped his fists at Xiaoyang's back and said, "Thank you for your help, fellow cultivator. It's fine, but you don't know how to deal with these dead spirits." Xiaoyang sighed. The dead spirit was indeed not strong. Otherwise, how could Xiaoyang kill it so easily? Of course, not knowing how to deal with it was also the most important reason. The white-robed man smiled helplessly. He was also very speechless. He said, "I've dealt with a dead spirit before, but it wasn't very difficult. But this time, it didn't seem to be formed because of a trace of obsession. It also had a very high spiritual intelligence and was very difficult to deal with." This was also what the white-robed man was puzzled about. He really couldn't figure out what was going on. It was really too strange. Whether it was from the ancient books or the information obtained from their parents, they all knew that dead spirits were formed because of a trace of obsession. They didn't have much spiritual intelligence at all. However, the ones he had encountered before were truly extraordinary. So he felt very strange and couldn't figure it out. Even if some dead spirits had spiritual intelligence, there were the dead spirits in the center of the divine tomb. Those with great power. Those were existences that even a ninth-order martial king would find difficult to fight. Xiaoyang didn't think too much about it. After all, whether the dead spirit had spiritual intelligence or not was just a sword strike. Looking back, Xiaoyang was stunned. The white-robed man was also stunned. "So it's Brother Xiao." The white-robed man smiled bitterly. Xiaoyang smiled faintly. He knew this person as well, but they had met during the battle. At that time, he was still in the 10 directions, 8 wastelands diagram, and this person wanted to snatch the divine fire medallion from him. Later, although Lu Qianshan was defeated, Xiaoyang did not carry out a ruthless killing technique, but left him to fend for himself. He didn't expect that he really had the chance to come to this divine tomb. "Did you offend someone outside?" Xiaoyang said somewhat solemnly. Lu Qianshan also frowned slightly when he heard that and said, "What do you mean?" Immediately, Xiaoyang stepped aside and pointed to the traces under his feet. Lu Qianshan walked over, and his brows immediately furrowed slightly. All of a sudden, Xiaoyang also felt that this matter was not simple. Lu Qianshan said that he felt that the dead spirit had spiritual intelligence. That was impossible, but what if someone manipulated it? This way, the situation was not ordinary. If this was premeditated, it was not impossible. Lu Qianshan shook his head and said, "I only admit that I haven't offended anyone so badly to want me to die in the divine tomb and never reincarnate." Xiaoyang smiled indifferently. Sometimes it was normal to offend people without knowing it. On top of that, the heart of a petty person was not something that could be easily measured. Perhaps, in the eyes of some petty people, even if it was some conflict in words, they could arouse an extremely strong desire for revenge. Presumably, this might be a coincidence. Lu Qianshan touched his chin and said somewhat hesitantly. However, when he said this, he was a little uncertain and felt a little guilty. After all, sometimes it was normal to inadvertently form a grudge without knowing it. They were all proud and arrogant geniuses. Sometimes it was normal to speak a little rashly. It was also not impossible to be hated by the other party. Xiaoyang shook his head. Right now, he couldn't find that person's aura, so he couldn't track him down. Since that's the case, Brother Lu, shall we go together? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Lu Qianshan was not stupid and naturally understood Xiaoyang's meaning. So he said, I couldn't ask for more. Soon after, the two looked at each other and smiled, then continued to walk forward. The reason why Xiaoyang followed Lu Qianshan was very simple. He wanted to see who had such means to manipulate the dead spirit. Since the other party had set his sights on Lu Qianshan, if there was really enmity between them, it would be exposed sooner or later. Soon after, they also opened up a distance. Xiaoyang pretended to leave, but he concealed his aura and returned, wanting to see if that person would still make a move. If he did, then Xiaoyang would definitely be able to find out. As for Lu Qianshan, he could still resist the dead spirit for a while. To catch bandits, first catch the king. If the king was taken, then the thief would naturally stop. But after following for 1,000 miles, there was no trace of that person, as if he had already given up. Or perhaps it was just a coincidence, and they were overthinking it. There were too many possibilities here, but none of them could be certain of anything. After walking for another 1,000 miles, Xiaoyang no longer continued to follow, but walked side by side with Lu Qianshan. They didn't know if this storm was a coincidence or not, but they couldn't make a judgment because of the lack of information. So, they could only put it aside for the time being. Along the way, they also talked about some things. Lu Qianshan didn't care about the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map. Speaking of which, he felt that the beating he suffered was really worth it, because this beating made him understand what it meant by, there is always someone better than you. Therefore, because of the change in his mentality, Lu Qianshan became more grounded and was no longer as impetuous as before. Now, Lu Qianshan admired this outsider more and more. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt that the Thunderfire Divine sword in his aperture had some strange movements, as if it had been summoned by something, and was trembling violently. Chapter 1748. Xiaoyang had never encountered such a change before. The Thunderfire Divine sword's rampage became more and more violent and difficult to suppress. It was as if its nature had erupted, wanting to rush out. It was very violent, just like a child who saw a candied haw. It wanted to get it very much and was jumping for joy, but the adults didn't allow it, so it threw a tantrum. Although it was possible to forcefully suppress it, the Thunderfire Divine sword still flew out on its own, as if it had been summoned by something. It directly turned into a sword light and flew out. Very quickly, it disappeared under the gloomy sky. Xiaoyang could still feel where his magic weapon was. The divine sword seemed to have noticed that its owner didn't follow, so it flew back again. It kept flying in front of Xiaoyang, as if telling him to follow it quickly. Seeing this scene, Lu Qianshan was also surprised. At the same time, he couldn't help but sigh. It was indeed worthy of being the prize of the competition. A saint-level, mid-grade magic weapon was really extraordinary. Although he was a little envious, Lu Qianshan also knew his own limitations. Even if this magic weapon was given to him, it would be difficult to suppress it. Xiaoyang was powerful, but he could only release it and let it do what it wanted. Brother Xiao, all good things must come to an end. I have also benefited a lot from traveling with you. Since you have already had your own opportunity, then I won't be thick-skinned and continue to travel with you. Lu Qianshan smiled slightly and said. Lu Qianshan naturally saw the current situation clearly. There must be a great opportunity for a magic weapon to lead him. Otherwise, how could such a situation occur? However, he still had no idea what the situation was like. Xiaoyang also laughed a little awkwardly and said, Okay, but you have to be careful. After all, it's never wrong to be cautious. Xiaoyang was a little worried about following him, so he had to wait here for that person to appear. But things didn't go as he wished. He didn't know if that person was too smart or it was a coincidence, but no one appeared at all. Therefore, there were many questions in his heart that he could not get an answer to. Now that the Thunderfire Divine sword had unsheathed itself, it was clear that there was something guiding it. That was why such a situation had occurred. His heart began to stir, wanting to see just what kind of opportunity was waiting for him. Lu Qianshan only smiled faintly, not minding this at all, and said, "Brother Xiao, don't worry. Having suffered once, I naturally won't suffer a second time. If you can't beat them, run away. If you can't run away, leave the tomb of the god of sin. It's much better than ruining your previous life and future life here." Hearing this, Xiaoyang felt a lot more at ease. After giving a few instructions, he turned into a ray of light with the Thunderfire Divine sword and disappeared into the sky. Lu Qianshan sighed helplessly when he saw the sword light disappear. At the same time, he felt somewhat helpless. Back then, he felt that there was only a fine line between him and Xiaoyang. But now, there was a world of difference. This feeling of disparity made him feel very uncomfortable in his heart. However, when he thought about how even Xin Luo, who ranked first on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard, was no match for him, and he himself had not even entered the top 10, what was the point? However, during this period of contact, Lu Qianshan also felt that making friends with Xiaoyang was indeed a very good experience. If there were any questions to ask, he would answer them one by one. No wonder Xin Wushuang and Bai Jian have such a close relationship with you. That must be it. It's like drinking wine, Lu Qianshan muttered with a smile at the corner of his mouth. Indeed, some friendships could only be formed after passing a test. Of course, Lu Qianshan did not think that he was qualified to become friends with Yi Shiwen, but a nodding acquaintance seemed pretty good. Immediately after, Lu Qianshan was about to continue moving forward, but he stopped in his tracks. Instead, he turned his head and saw a cloud of black fog coming towards him. "We've been waiting for you here for a long time. You're finally willing to give yourself away?" Lu Qianshan laughed. Immediately, the black fog stopped moving forward. Instead, it floated in the air and wavered. In an instant, the dead spirit pounced over, but it was not as methodical as before. Instead, it relied entirely on instinct to kill. Lu Qianshan did not tangle with it. Instead, he quickly ran in the other direction and did not fight it head-on. What he said before was just to scare the person hiding in the dark. Initially, he thought it was just a coincidence. However, Xiaoyang had disappeared as soon as he left, which meant that it was not a coincidence. Xiaoyang's departure was also a fact. Therefore, Lu Qianshuan's previous words were just to scare the other party so that he could find a chance to escape. Of course, another detail that made Lu Qianshan certain that someone had done it on purpose was that after he spoke, the cloud of black fog stopped and then went berserk. There was something wrong with it. The dead spirit had attacked in an orderly manner. It was obviously man-made. The subsequent berserk was obviously an outburst of suppressed emotions after the dead spirit was controlled. After getting rid of the dead spirit, Lu Qianshan did not stop but continued to run. He knew that the person was afraid of Xiaoyang's strength, so he did not dare to make a move. But now, without Xiaoyang's protection, he could only fend for himself. Therefore, he did not stop at all. No matter where he was, he could only run for his life. That person could sense Xiaoyang's departure, so it could be inferred that his strength was probably not bad. Even if he was not as good as Xiaoyang, he was still much stronger than Lu Qianshan. Such an unforeseen event made Lu Qianshan have a lot of doubts in his heart. He had always been a kind person and had never offended anyone. Why was he being hunted down now? Or could it be that there was some secret on him that made the other party so tempted? However, he felt that it was not the case. A moment later, another cloud of black fog appeared and followed Lu Qianshan. Furthermore, it began to chase after him. When he saw it appear again, Lu Qianshuan's heart almost collapsed. After scaring that person away, he did not expect that he would be able to realize that something was wrong so quickly and chase after him. It was really difficult to deal with. Immediately, Lu Qianshun let out a low shout, and a wisp of sword intent appeared in his hand. The sword intent was very strange. It was half thunder and half fire. This was what Xiaoyang had given to Lu Qianshun before he left. This sword intent was enough to kill ordinary dead spirits, and could also deter the person behind the scenes. Chapter 1749. A sword intent poured out, and the undead spirit was stunned again, as if it felt threatened. It didn't dare to come any closer. Obviously, the person controlling the undead spirit felt that something was wrong and thought it was a trap, so he fled like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Now, how could he still care about the undead spirit he was controlling? In an instant, the sword qi completely strangled the undead spirit, causing its soul to scatter and cease to exist. Lu Qianshun stood in place. His gaze was still wandering as he quickly searched for the person who made the move in the dark. However, there was no trace of that person for a long time, and no new undead spirit came to probe. It was obvious that it was scared away and didn't dare to come up with any ideas. At this time, Lu Qianshun also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Xiaoyang left him a sword intent, making him feel that the threat was still there, which was why he fled. Otherwise, he would have to give up his life here today. Although Lu Qianshun wasn't afraid of a head-on battle, if he didn't even know who his opponent was in the end, it would inevitably be too sullen. He couldn't accept such an outcome. Fortunately, the other party had hidden and fled again, so he was still safe for the time being. However, Lu Qianshun didn't dare to stay any longer and quickly rushed forward. He knew very well that if he stayed any longer, there might be trouble waiting for him. Right now, the best plan was to quickly leave this troublesome place and get rid of the despicable person who secretly hurt him. As for baiting out the person behind him, he didn't have such an idea. Not to mention whether the opponent was stronger than him. Just the undead spirit he was controlling was enough to make it difficult for him to deal with. Therefore, he naturally didn't have the heart to cause trouble. In the divine tomb, there were countless opportunities. Who knew when one's luck would be good enough to obtain them? However, if he died here, it wouldn't be a good thing. What's more, if he really died here, the final result would probably be to become an undead spirit and accompany the divine tomb for eternity. He knew the pros and cons, so he didn't dare to take the risk. In the sky, a sword was in front and a person was behind. Xiaoyang followed the Thunderfire divine sword and flew forward quickly. The further they went, the more agitated the Thunderfire divine sword became. Its sword intent seemed to be unable to be suppressed as it constantly leaked out. It was as if he was a child who was having a good time. All along, the Thunderfire divine sword had been relatively quiet. After recognizing its master, it was completely under the control of Xiaoyang. Now that he was acting so abnormally, it meant that there was a reason behind it. Right now, Xiaoyang already had some guesses in his heart. He felt that the reason why the divine sword was so excited was probably because it had sensed the aura of its former master. As for how the Thunderfire divine sword came about, Xiaoyang was not clear, but now he had some ideas. Perhaps this sword was the personal sword of some almighty being, and it was later lost due to various reasons. However, the thing in the divine sword was not complete, and the reason was not enough to explain it. However, it was really hard to say if he could complete it this time. If he could complete it, then the power of this magic weapon would probably increase by a lot. At that time, even if he faced Lei Dingtian again, Xiaoyang would feel that his chances of winning would be much higher. However, these were just some guesses and could not be accurate. Not long after, ravines crisscrossed the eyes. Some places were even cracked, like spider webs, densely packed and shocking. There are even broken swords and broken sabers scattered everywhere in some places. However, due to the passage of time and the invasion of death aura, they had been completely weathered. There was no spiritual energy in them, and they were rotten, turning into pieces of scrap iron. In fact, after a few thousand years, these scrap iron would completely disappear and cease to exist. Looking at those huge ravines, Xiaoyang sighed inexplicably. Those were all traces left behind by a battle. Even though many places had been completely weathered and had changed with the passage of time, they were still so obvious. It could be seen how terrifying the battle back then was. How could a battle between powerhouses be described in just a few words? Because he had reached that level, Xiaoyang was very clear that the degree of devastation back then was much more severe than expected. It was hard to imagine. Sometimes, if one did not see it with their own eyes, they would not know how tragic the situation was. Along the way, there were some skeletons. The skeletons of cultivators who had reached King Wu's level would not rot for thousands of years and would not decay for tens of thousands of years. However, the skeletons here had been completely weathered, as if they would shatter at the slightest touch. Therefore, according to what was said before, these powerhouses were all above King Wu's level. It was hard to imagine how powerful the realm of the gods was back then. At the same time, Xiaoyang was very clear about another point. The realm of the gods was tyrannical and could be said to be the top of the 3,000 small worlds. It even contained spiritual meridians, which was not something that could be found in the 3,000 small worlds. The spiritual meridians contained within were the reason why the spiritual energy in the realm of the gods was so dense. In the end, this was the reason. Therefore, the origin of the realm of the gods was definitely not simple. As for why the realm of the gods had fallen to such a state and was no longer as glorious as it used to be, it was probably because of a catastrophe in the tomb of the gods. Xiaoyang had a few guesses in his heart about what it was like, but he could not be sure. Therefore, some questions needed to be confirmed before he could get an accurate answer. The further he went, the thicker the aura of death lingering around. He even encountered a few dead souls along the way. Their strength was not ordinary, and they were much stronger than those he encountered outside. Fortunately, with the Thunder Fire Divine sword opening the way in front, those dead souls were afraid of the power of thunder and fire, so they did not attack easily. Otherwise, even if Xiaoyang had the advantage, it would not be easy to kill his way through. Some dead souls were wandering around in some places, and some were like mountains, sitting there without the slightest movement. Although those dead souls were very tyrannical, one could feel that they were already very weak. Obviously, the divine souls within were almost at the point of being like a lamp that had run out of oil, and could only rely on the aura of death to barely hold on. After another few hundred miles, the Thunder Fire Divine sword suddenly turned and rushed downwards. Its speed could be said to be extremely fast, without the slightest hesitation. Xiaoyang also rushed down immediately. He wanted to see what kind of surprise this divine sword would bring him. Chapter 1750. The Thunder Fire Divine sword was now like a child, cheerful and excited. When it landed, it even drew a sword flower. Immediately, the thunder fire will also rose directly. It was as if it was showing off its power to someone and asking for credit. The child's nature was also fully displayed. Seeing this, Xiaoyang only smiled indifferently. This was how a magic weapon had spirit. It was a pity that the Thunder Fire Divine sword's spiritual intelligence had long been weakened due to its injuries. In fact, it was close to non-existent. That was why it had fallen to the middle grade of the saint level. Otherwise, its grade would have been even higher. In fact, it would not have been strange for it to be an existence that surpassed the saint level. Now, Xiaoyang had some ideas in his heart. If he could properly nourish the Thunder Fire Divine sword, there might be some unexpected surprises in the future. Of course, this was a matter for the future. As for whether it would succeed, it was really hard to say. After all, it also depended on whether the Thunder Fire Divine sword was extraordinary or not. Moreover, some things still needed to rely on opportunities. If it was done by force, it might be counterproductive. As the Thunder Fire Divine sword landed, a cloud of black mist immediately emerged. However, the death aura was expelled at an extremely fast speed. The black mist quickly dispersed, revealing the shape of a person. The spirit looked very weak, like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Xiao Yang also immediately landed on the ground. He looked at the wisp of soul remnant in front of him with a smile on his face. Seeing that the divine sword was so close to him, he must be its first master. The remnant soul seemed to turn a blind eye to Xiao Yang. With a casual wave of his hand, the Thunderfire divine sword obediently fell into his hand. It was like a child acting coquettishly in front of an adult, complaining about its own suffering. The the spirit sword met. The scene of them fighting side by side countless years ago seemed to be slowly flowing. The remnant spirit's fingers gently stroked the sword as if it was stroking its lover. It allowed the aura flowing from the divine sword to strangle its power, but it did not care at all. It was as if it did not feel the slightest pain. The reason why the remnant soul was able to survive until now was naturally very simple. It was because of the encirclement of the aura of death that gave him the confidence to continue living. And this sword just so happened to be able to restrain death energy. By the time he was done wiping the entire sword, his 2 fingers had also been completely burned away and no longer existed. This was the result of the Thunderfire divine sword trying its best to restrain its sharpness. If it hadn't done so, its master would have suffered even more serious injuries. The remnant soul revealed a smile, seemingly very satisfied. Its eyes were also full of reluctance, as if there were too many words that it wanted to say to its sword. It was just that he hadn't spoken for too long, so he couldn't utter a single word. However, the 2 of them were already mentally connected. There was no need for the other party to say anything, and they already understood each other clearly. After all, at that time they had grown up together, supported each other, and reached a high position. Later on, they even joined forces to dominate the world. At that time, each of them killed their enemies with a single sword. The number of enemies that died under their swords was even more immeasurable. However, it was also in that battle that its master died and the Thunderfire divine sword's grade fell because of it. If it weren't for the fact that the tomb of the god of Sin opened later on and someone picked it up, it would have been invaded by the aura of death and turned into scrap metal. It wouldn't have been as lively as it was now. Xiao Yang stood there quietly without saying a word. He even deliberately paid attention to his own breathing. It wasn't easy for the man and the sword to meet after 10,000 years. In addition, even though the man's foundation was injured, he still had to caress the sword's edge. It could be seen how infatuated he was. If it were possible, Xiao Yang wouldn't hesitate to leave the Thunderfire divine sword behind. However, he couldn't do that because its former master was only left with a wisp of remnant soul. Bringing it along would hurt him instead. At the same time, Xiao Yang found it hard to imagine how deep the relationship between the man and the sword was. This was because what he saw wasn't the depth of the man's obsession, but the face of the remnant soul was full of tenderness and reluctance. His eyes weren't turbid either, and there wasn't even the slightest bit of pain. There was only a smile and carefree expression. They were like old friends who had reunited after a long time, telling each other about their sufferings over the years. Seeing that the aura of the remnant soul began to weaken, and the aura of death was even hurt by the aura that leaked out unintentionally, Xiao Yang shook his head helplessly. All of a sudden, an understanding appeared in his mind. The remnant soul couldn't bear to let go. Could it be that he wanted to use the divine sword to send him away? This was indeed a way to free himself. As long as the soul was destroyed, he naturally wouldn't have to endure the torment of the aura of death anymore. He would feel his conscience and consciousness being devoured bit by bit. In the end, he could only become a mindless monster. After a long time, the remnant soul slowly raised his head and looked at Xiao Yang. "Senior." Xiao Yang cupped his hands and bowed. The remnant soul opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was unknown what he was saying. Seeing that Xiao Yang was puzzled, the remnant soul smiled bitterly. In the end, he wasn't able to make a sound. It had been too long and he was silent. He had almost forgotten how to speak. In fact, he had almost lost the ability to make a sound. This was the eternity of eternity. Countless years of loneliness had caused a person to lose too many things. Xiao Yang wasn't in a hurry. He stood there obediently, waiting for the remnant soul to speak without the slightest bit of impatience. Seeing this, the remnant soul smiled with relief. Now that he thought about it, there were some young people who had come here before. However, they had all treated him like he was a demon and wanted to kill him. At that time, his mind wasn't clear, and he just went with the flow and fought with them. It could be said that it was because of the appearance of the thunder, fire divine sword that his mind recovered a little. When the divine sword was in his hand, all the negative effects were suppressed. Of course, this was the power of the divine sword. It was also because his emotions were too deep that he was able to awaken the remnant soul and maintain the clarity of his consciousness. However, the price of doing so was also very high. As the death aura decreased, his life force would also decrease because of this. I am Jianyun, the first master of this sword. After a long while, the remnant soul finally spoke. Although he had almost forgotten his language, he could still remember the things that were engraved in his bones. Chapter 1751. However, Jianyun's voice was still staccato and slow. It was obvious that he was still not used to speaking. However, he was clear enough to understand what Jianyun meant. Hence, Jianyun did not have to spend too much time guessing. I heard from it that you're not bad. I'm glad that it found a good master. Without waiting for Xiao Yang to open his mouth, Jianyun began to speak intermittently again. However, compared to before, this time around, he spoke faster and more coherently. He did not have to speak word by word like before. Hearing the senior's compliment, Xiao Yang just smiled. Speaking of which, his comprehension of the sword principle was indeed not much, so he could be considered a junior. As for his previous life, he was immersed in the cultivation of poison power. At that time, he was completely focused. Hence, he naturally neglected some things and did not take it to heart. It's a pity that both of you are not very compatible. Hence, you can't unleash the full power of the sword, Jianyun said with a trace of regret on his face. As the first master of the sword, he naturally knew that once the sword recognized a master, it would never recognize another master unless the master died. In other words, as long as Xiao Yang was still alive, the thunder fire divine sword would follow him. Jianyun, on the other hand, was already dead. As for the cultivation left behind by the remnant soul, it was nothing. Currently, Jianyun could only be said to be a monster that was neither human nor ghost. Even his consciousness could only remain clear at this time. Xiao Yang also smiled bitterly helplessly. That was indeed the case. That was also the reason why he changed to the silver lightning spear during the battle with Lei Dingtian and not the thunder fire divine sword that was of a higher grade and more powerful. Sometimes it was very important to be handy. Neither of them could be missing. But that's fine. You're naturally close to lightning. If you can unleash half of its power to the extreme, it's not bad. Who knows, you might be able to discover something new by favoring one over the other. Jianyun seemed to have opened up a chatterbox and began to chatter. From Jianyun's point of view, since the godly sword had already changed its master and had even acknowledged him as its master, there was nothing more to be said. Although he could kill Xiao Yang in a fit of rage, as long as he killed him, the Thunderfire Divine sword would become ownerless. If it was in the past, Jianyun might have really done so. However, countless years had passed, and things had changed. Besides, he didn't think that he could really kill the young man in front of him. Even if they were to choose to perish together, they might not be able to kill him. If he succeeded, the Thunderfire Divine sword would probably be left here as well. Under the invasion of the endless aura of death, it would decay one day, just like the other weapons. In the end, it would become scrap metal, or even disappear completely. I'll give you the things that this sword lacks as well. I hope that you can make good use of them. Don't bring shame to my reputation. Jianyun's face lit up as he spoke. It was as if he had recalled the days when he was in high spirits. He had traveled the world alone with his sword, traversing through the 3,000 worlds and living a carefree life. Those were all things of the past, things that happened too long ago. It was even to the extent that he didn't know exactly how many tens of thousands of years had passed, and those so-called deeds had probably already been forgotten and forgotten by others. That boldness came and went quickly. What was left was only sadness and unwillingness. Why did things turn out like this? It was all because too much time had passed and no one could change it. Time could dilute too many things, and it wasn't something that everyone could change. Even though the Thunderfire Divine Sword had tried its best to suppress its sharpness to ensure that it would reduce the damage to its first master, it was still difficult to suppress it. Jian Yun's aura was still constantly weakening. However, Jian Yun didn't care about it at all, allowing the power of his divine soul to weaken. In his opinion, being able to maintain the clarity of his spirit was already an extremely difficult task. If he were to relax again, he was afraid that his divine consciousness would become dim again. How would he explain some things? Jian Yun smiled in satisfaction when he saw that the young man wasn't anxious at all and was even listening to him humbly. Sword intent could be incomparably sharp and domineering, but it couldn't be impatient. If a person's heart was impetuous, he might not be able to hold the sword steadily. However, the other party gave him a slightly slow-witted feeling, which made him a little displeased. However, this wasn't something that couldn't be changed. As the sword art deepened in the future, there would naturally be changes. This couldn't be rushed. What's more, sword intent wasn't something that could be nurtured overnight. It could only be nurtured slowly over many years and months before it could be nurtured. Although this sword has fallen in grade and is no longer as glorious as before, you have to remember to nurture it well every day. As long as you put in enough effort, it will be able to recover to its peak one day. This sword can also be considered as my natal item. How high its achievement depends on how strong the master is and how much effort he will put in, Jian Yun said in a low voice. Xiaoyang nodded. He was naturally clear about this. It was just that he didn't know how to do it. It was also because of the uniqueness of this sword that Xiaoyang didn't act rashly. Otherwise, there would be unexpected problems if he tried to be clever but ended up making a fool of himself. By then, he would probably be in big trouble. Senior, don't worry. I'll definitely treat it well, Xiaoyang said sincerely. It could be said that the Thunder Fire Divine Sword was the highest grade magic weapon in Xiaoyang's possession. Regarding this, he naturally had to treat it well. Perhaps it could achieve even higher achievements. As for how far it could go, it was really hard to determine. After all, this sword's plasticity was really too high. Hearing this, Jian Yun smiled and nodded. He was very satisfied with such an answer. As for the other requests, in his opinion, they were meaningless. As for their era, it had been too long since then. Perhaps no one could remember it anymore, so there was nothing much to say. He couldn't say those superficial words. In that case, I'll impart all the remaining things in the sword to you. If one day you meet a fated person, you have to nurture him, Jian Yun said solemnly. In Jian Yun's opinion, Xiaoyang was indeed not bad, but he wasn't very compatible with it. Therefore, he couldn't unleash the full potential of the sword. Now, everything was just a stopgap measure. Okay. Xiaoyang didn't even think about it and directly agreed to this matter. Treasures could only be obtained by the virtuous. When fate arrived, naturally it couldn't be forced. Chapter 1752. Seeing that the young man was so straightforward, Jian Yun smiled. He liked the young man's personality as he was not coy or pretentious. In this way, his skill could be passed down. Wouldn't that be great? As for the young man, it would be a good thing if he could have a chance encounter and be compatible with the sword principle. At least, he was satisfied with the straightforward young man. The only thing he was not satisfied with was that he could not be compatible with the sword. The affairs of the world were unpredictable. No one knew what kind of unforeseen event would happen in the future. It was hard to say. After I pass down the sword skill to you, you have to promise me one thing, Jian Yun spoke again. After speaking so much, he had almost completely recovered his ability to speak. Moreover, his pronunciation had become very clear, unlike before when he stuttered and was seriously slow. Xiao Yang nodded and said, "Senior, please tell me. If it's something that I can do, I will do it. If it is not ethical, I can only reject it." When Jian Yun heard this, he burst out laughing. The more he looked at the current owner of his sword, the more he liked him. He was neither servile nor overbearing and had a good heart. He was not an impetuous person. Even if he had great achievements in the future, he would not become an existence that would bring disaster and disgrace to his own things. "Don't worry. It is not a big deal. However, I still have a lot of brothers around me. I won't ask you to kill all of them, but you must kill all the dead souls within a 10-mile radius and scatter their souls." Jian Yun gritted his teeth and said. When Xiaoyang heard that, his eyebrows trembled slightly. To him, such a request was indeed not a difficult thing to do. However, what was the deeper meaning behind it? "I'm sure you're aware that I'm only able to stay conscious temporarily because I'm holding onto this sword. Without the sword, I will also become a dead soul with obsession. I might even lose my consciousness. Back then, I was beaten until my soul was scattered. However, people like us are suffering endless torment," Jian Yin said regretfully. It could be said that in the endless time he was suffering from the attack of the death aura all the time. It could be said that he was suffering unspeakably. Moreover, he could not even end his own life. He could only bear the endless difficulties. On the contrary, once they died, their souls would scatter. That was the true release for them. Even if his past and future lives were cut off, it was still better than enduring the torment of eternity. All those years ago, the few of them had also died from exhaustion here, and their remnant souls were still lingering here. It could be said that they suffered unspeakably. Xiao Yang nodded and said seriously, "No problem." When Jian Yun heard this, he nodded his head in satisfaction. This was also the result that he had wanted. Although he already had a way to free himself, his brothers couldn't. Therefore, he had to make arrangements for his funeral. "That's good," Jian Yin said as he looked at his surroundings longingly. This was also the place where he fought bloody battles. Although the end result was not good, he did not regret it. It was indeed not satisfactory, but the worst-case scenario was not as terrifying as he had expected. If I may be so bold as to ask, what kind of battle happened here that caused this place to become a graveyard and filled with death qi? Xiao Yang couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked. Since Jian Yin was able to remain conscious, it meant that he was able to remember some of the things that happened before. Therefore, it was not impossible to ask him for clarification. Of course, he also wanted to verify his own thoughts. "It's just a war of worlds," Jian Yun said lightly. Hearing this, Xiao Yang's entire body trembled. He had read about this in a book before, but he didn't care about it at that time. He felt that it was just a record. If he hadn't seen it before, then it didn't exist. But now that it came from Jian Yun's mouth, he understood what was going on. Sure enough, this was similar to what he had expected. The reason why the realm of gods was so superior was that it didn't belong to the 3,000 small worlds. It was because of this that the realm of gods had so many benefits. It could guarantee that they could create countless King Wu level 8 existences. There were even existences above King Wu level. Without Jian Yun saying it, he knew that the realm of gods had lost the War of Worlds. Otherwise, how could it appear in the 3,000 small worlds? The great Tao was merciless, and the war was even more cruel. It's a pity. Back then, we were too overbearing and angered everyone. That's why there were people who interfered. Otherwise, how could we have lost? So what if they joined forces? Didn't they all die here in the end? Jian Yin said as he recalled the events of the past. After he died, the divine soul he left behind also saw that scene. Their king used a forbidden technique, killing all of the invading enemies and turning the tide. However, it hurt the heavens' way, which was why they lost. They didn't lose to the war, but to the heavens' way. You don't have to think too much. After all, it's all in the past. It's all in the past. You don't have to think about taking revenge for me. After all, I was buried here. Jian Yin said with a smile. Of course. Xiao Yong wasn't thinking about this problem. Instead, he was thinking about the details back then. You don't have to know too much. It's all in the past. All these years, I've noticed that the number of talents has withered and we're no longer as glorious as we were in the past. Jian Yin said and sighed helplessly. Now, most of the people who entered the tomb of the gods were King Wu rank 8. As for those who were rank 9, they were pitifully few. Compared to them back then, they were much worse. Of course, this was also related to the environment. If they didn't lose back then, these people could also be promoted to a higher level. Xiao Yong smiled faintly. There was indeed nothing to think about. After all, it was too long ago. Even if he looked into it, he wouldn't be able to get an answer. Even if he knew the whole story, what could he do? So many years had passed and many generations had changed. Even if there were grudges, they would have disappeared in the long river of the human world. Then, Jian Yin shouted and threw the sword in his hand. At the same time, he turned into a ray of sword light and charged towards the sword. The reason why Jian Yin was special was that the Thunder Fire Divine sword had left a sword essence to protect him. Therefore, he was able to regain his consciousness at this time. Now that it had brought a new owner, some things should naturally be returned to their original owners. As for himself, he could put down all his worries and die in peace. So what if he turned into nothingness? It was better than being tortured in the endless death chi. Chapter 1753. On a plain, this place was very different. In the divine tomb, there had always been deathly aura lingering around. But now, this place was unusually clear, and there was not the slightest trace of deathly aura. Some were unusually clear, as if it was the outside world. It was filled with spiritual energy, and even the clouds in the sky had turned white. Of course, that was not real. It was because the Almighty had turned it white. Of course, this was not very accurate. Those clouds were like ice sculptures, and that was why it was like this. The white land was also because it was frozen, and that was why it was like this. Looking around, it was pure white, and there were thousands of miles of mysterious ice. An iceberg stood there, and countless mysterious ice covered it. Among them, there was a white-robed young man. His pupils were not ordinary. They were not black, but they were snowflake-shaped. They were white, snow-white. There was a sword in front of the young man. It was also made of mysterious ice, and it was constantly emitting cold energy. It could be said that it was very threatening. Even the surrounding air was almost frozen, and the deathly aura was completely frozen without exception. The mysterious ice sword stood in front of the young man, and traces of cold energy poured out. It looked light, but its lethality was unusually strong and unpredictable. This person was Luo Ku from the Sun Snow Realm. He was the one who had declared that he would take the first place. However, because of a moment of carelessness, he was sent flying by Xiao Yang's kick. In the end, he had no choice but to accept the result of his defeat. It could be said that it was a tragic sight. Surrounded by mysterious ice, Luo Ku seemed to be extraordinary. These mysterious ice were his armor. If one wanted to hurt him, one would naturally have to go through these layers of mysterious ice. Therefore, he was very safe now. However, Luo Ku's expression was very ugly. The mysterious ice was one of his trump cards. To be able to force it out, one could see how powerful his opponent was. What made Luo Ku the most unhappy was that he did not even know who his opponent was. Some of them were dead spirits that pounced on him. If he did not have such a unique skill, he would have been defeated long ago. There were 3 mysterious ice blocks around him, and they were filled with black energy. These were the 3 dead spirits. They had been frozen by him and could no longer pose a threat to him. However, he did not dare to relax in the slightest. Moreover, it was hard to say how things would develop. In the next moment, he saw a cluster of black fog rapidly flying towards him. He immediately frowned, his face pale and ugly. Although the undead spirit's cultivation was not as good as his, it would still consume a lot of spiritual energy to freeze it, especially to maintain the 1,000 miles of mysterious ice, which required a lot of spiritual energy. Even though he had taken a few dawn, it was like throwing a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. It was difficult to continue. I want to see how many undead you can control. Luo Ku shouted in a low voice. Immediately, he pointed his finger at the profound ice sword. Immediately, a storm of profound ice swept towards the dead spirit. Immediately, the black fog continued to spread. Wave after wave of powerful force continued to surge. Those mysterious ice were continuously sent flying. Moreover, they turned into powder and fell to the ground. However, because of this, the speed of the black fog became much slower. It was not as fast as before. Occasionally, some mysterious ice would pierce into the black fog and freeze it a little. However, the speed was not fast. However, Luo Ku was not in a hurry. When the black fog was only 10 feet away from him, it would completely turn into profound ice and would not be able to get close to him. His opponent's method was very simple. He was only controlling the dead spirits. However, Luo Ku did not know how long this situation would last. As for him, how long could he last? Right now, Luo Ku was also thinking in his heart. What was going on? What kind of person had such a method to be able to control the dead spirits to fight for him? Luo Ku really could not understand such a question. However, he felt that after entering the divine tomb, everyone could be an enemy. Therefore, he could not accurately guess what was going on. Sure enough, when the dead spirit was 10 feet away from him, it was completely frozen. With a clang, it fell onto the ice and could not continue forward. At this moment, Luo Ku secretly sighed in relief. He stopped moving and began to accumulate power in preparation for the next change. However, he was very nervous. He did not dare to relax in the slightest. He did not know when the dead spirit would launch its next attack. The interval between the 4 attacks was getting shorter and shorter. Therefore, according to this pattern, the next attack would arrive very soon. After waiting for a long time, Luo Ku saw another cloud of black fog surging toward him. He immediately focused and prepared to freeze it again. He pointed his finger again. The profound ice sword released a chilling aura again. Countless snowflakes flew out and attacked the black fog. However, at this moment, Luo Ku secretly cried out in his heart. Boom! Suddenly, a cloud of black fog appeared under Luo Ku's feet. He immediately lost control of his body and was sent flying. This scene was very familiar. Back then, during the grand competition, he was heavily surrounded and defeated by this person. The heel was the weakness of the profound ice sword. This time, Luo Ku did not defend himself and allowed the enemy to succeed. Immediately, the dead spirit under his feet rushed up and madly surged into Luo Ku's body. In a ruin, Xiaoyang sat cross-legged. The Thunderfire Divine Sword was erected in front of him, constantly emitting light. It was dazzling, and the sword intent was awe-inspiring. The surrounding aura of death seemed to feel threatened and quickly scattered. It did not dare to invade. As for Jian Yin, after he returned the remaining sword intent to the Thunderfire Divine Sword, his spirit also lost its support. His spirit also surged into the sea of fire and was devoured by the lightning pool. When Jian Yun gripped his sword once more, he had already decided what his ending would be. In the end, dying under his own sword did not seem to be a grievance. At least he could make his own choice. Compared to his comrades, it was much better. Many people had now turned into dead spirits. They had lost their consciousness and became walking corpses in this world. The higher a person's cultivation level, the more arrogant they would be. On the path of the great path, they would naturally strive forward. Even if there was a problem and they fell into a bottomless abyss, they would not be afraid. They would only be afraid of falling into depravity. Once one's mind changed, many things would become meaningless. If one lost their pride, even if they were eternal, they would become walking corpses. Then, what was the point of seeking immortality? Suddenly, Xiaoyang opened his eyes. One of them was like thunder, and the other was like raging fire. Chapter 1754. The mellow and sharp sword could not be suppressed at this moment. It spread out. Even though he had not moved and his sword was still there, the sword chi was constantly being released. It could not be suppressed, but it was controlled very well. The ground he was sitting on did not change at all. This was also the exquisite control. Wherever the sword aura was directed, it would not hurt the innocent. It would only attack the target. Xiaoyang could now feel every sword aura that was emitted from his body. It was very clear and extraordinary. It was very eye-catching. Thunder and fire! With a low roar, Xiaoyang held the sword in his hand and swung it down. Immediately, countless sword intents surged out. The sword intents formed by lightning and flames intertwined and spread out in all directions. For a moment, everywhere it passed, it could be said that it was a piece of scorched earth. Even the death aura did not have the slightest resistance under such power. It instantly dissipated into nothingness and no longer existed. The part that the thunder and fire sword technique completed was how to combine the power of the two attributes to create an even more powerful sword aura. This move was also very simple and violent. It moved like thunder and attacked like fire. It combined the two sword essences from before. It went from simple to complex. The thunder and fire intertwined, and the power could be said to be increased to the extreme. Wherever it passed, some dead souls did not have the chance to dodge. The thunder and fire burned, and the black fog dissipated instantly. Even the souls were directly destroyed by the sword aura. Within a radius of 10 miles, all the dead souls were eliminated by this sword. Xiaoyang sheathed his sword and looked over. Looking at the scorched earth, he sighed helplessly. It was a pity that the divine tomb was so big and there were so many dead souls. It was almost impossible for him to destroy all the dead souls with his own strength. Therefore, he had no choice but to fulfill Jian Yan's last wish, which was to destroy the souls of his comrades so that they would no longer suffer. At the same time, he was deeply touched. He did not expect the power of the combination of the two forces to be so terrifying. It was indeed shocking. Although it was not as pure as before, the destructive power was more powerful. There was also a sword technique behind it, but Xiaoyang didn't know how to use it, so he couldn't comprehend the principles behind it for the time being. The reason why he was able to comprehend Thunder Eclipse and Fire Plunder to this extent in such a short period of time was because of the good foundation he had previously laid. However, the last sword strike seemed to have nothing to do with the previous 3 sword strikes. It was very confusing. Of course, Xiaoyang did not care about it. With this move, it was enough. When facing different enemies, the way of fighting would naturally be different. Sometimes there was no point in forcefully asking for so much. For some things, once one's divine intent reached a certain level, one would naturally be able to comprehend the sword arts within. Therefore, he had to let nature take its course. Soon after, Xiaoyang kept the sword back into his acupuncture point. After obtaining the complete sword technique, he also knew how to nourish the divine sword. He had the silent thunder pearl, so he could use it. However, he was a little helpless when it came to the fire element, so he could only use his spiritual qi to forcefully transform it. It was also because Xiaohua had yet to finish devouring the black flames and could not be disturbed. Otherwise, if Xiaohua came to help, it would probably be twice the result with half the effort. However, sometimes it was useless to be anxious. On the contrary, it was easy to spoil things through excessive enthusiasm. It was better to take it slow. After such a long time, the black flames had yet to be completely digested. It could be seen how tenacious it was. Fortunately, Xiaohua was powerful enough. Under the continuous devouring, his strength also continued to grow. Now his strength could almost sweep away an ordinary King Wu of the 8th level. If the black flames were to be completely devoured, how terrifying would that be? This was also the reason why Xiao Yang dared to stay in the tomb of the god of sin. When Xiao Hu finished devouring, he would have the confidence to compete with Lei Dingtian when he met him again. It was just that several years had already passed, and he had yet to succeed. If not for the fact that their minds were connected, Xiaoyang would have thought that he had been devoured by the black flames. One had to admit that the black flames were indeed very tenacious. Until now, it still had its own spiritual intelligence and was still resisting. However, the overall situation was already set. It could only resist and could not do anything else. Soon after, Xiaoyang did not look anymore and continued forward. Now, for him, going to the center of the tomb of the god of sin was the most important thing. Moreover, he had been in the tomb of the god of sin for a long time. It was time to go to the center to try his luck. If there was really no luck, then he could only choose to leave this place. He could not force it. He could only leave it to fate. Moreover, Xiao Yang's harvest in the tomb of the god of sin this time was not small. Not only did he obtain the true meaning of the body refining technique, the art of manifestation, but he also completed the Thunderfire sword technique and also obtained the method of nourishing. In fact, he even gained some insights and had his own opinions on some other matters. Perhaps this method could be used in other places. After walking for a while, Xiaoyang suddenly stopped in his tracks. He turned around and saw a dead soul slowly flying towards him. If you want to fight, come out together. You want to take me down with just this dead soul? This is a little too childish. Xiaoyang sneered and said. The dead soul also stopped abruptly and did not continue to move forward. Xiaoyang raised his eyes and looked around. His divine sense also quickly spread out in an attempt to find the mastermind. However, he was blocked by layers of death qi and could not detect it at all. Presumably, that person was also very good at concealment. Otherwise, how could he escape Xiaoyang's eyes? Fight or not, why are you doing this? Xiaoyang scolded in a cold voice. Thinking about it carefully, Xiaoyang's only enemy was Lei Dingtian. However, he was a person who had reached the 9th stage. He would not use such a shameful method. As for Shen Zhuang, he valued his pride more. It was even more impossible. As for whether it was someone else, Xiaoyang did not know. But he was sure that it was at least not a person of the 9th stage. Otherwise, how could he use such a shameful method? You want to touch me, but don't dare to show up? You don't even dare to make a move now. Tell me, what's the use of you? Xiaoyang said coldly. As he spoke, Xiaoyang also expanded his consciousness, trying to find the person hiding behind. Suddenly, the dead soul moved and retreated in another direction in an orderly manner. Xiaoyang just watched, but did not divert his attention. He knew that this was obviously a covert action. If he really followed the undead spirit, he would definitely not be able to find the person behind the scenes. However, Xiaoyang's consciousness swept within a radius of 10 miles and still found nothing. He could not find the slightest abnormality. It was as if there was no one behind the scenes in the surroundings at all. He was just being paranoid. Chapter 1755. After a long while, everything calmed down and the tense atmosphere from before vanished without a trace at this moment. The dead spirit also retreated quietly and no one knew where it had escaped to. However, no matter how Xiaoyang searched, he could not find any trace of that person. He was helpless. This feeling could be said to be terrible. He was being targeted, but he did not know who it was. It could be said that he was in the light and the enemy was in the dark. It was not an easy task to find him. He couldn't breathe normally, so he felt uncomfortable all over. He was very unhappy. If it was a real battle, even if he was facing Lei Dingtian, who was in the 9th rank, Xiaoyang was not afraid. In his opinion, a battle on the surface would be a satisfying one, and there was no need to be on guard. But now he might not even know when he would fall into the trap. Such a situation could be said to be very bad. Previously, because he had encountered such a situation with Lu Qianshan, Xiaoyang also knew that this was definitely not a coincidence. Most likely, someone was playing tricks. But what exactly that person wanted to do, it was really hard to say. So, Xiaoyang was also very helpless about this. Since he could not guess what the other party wanted to do, Xiaoyang did not think about it and continued to move forward. Because, in his opinion, since the other party was determined to go against him, then sooner or later he would be exposed. So, there was no need to be anxious. He himself would not be able to hold back and would surface. What would happen, he did not know. How things would develop in the future, that was also impossible to deduce. He could only think of a way to deal with it when the situation came to a head. Immediately, Xiaoyang continued to move forward and did not think about these things. There were many problems. Since he could not figure it out, then he would not think about it. There was no need to waste his energy. At least, in this divine tomb, there were very few people who could make Xiaoyang afraid. At least the Almighty of the God realm would not make a move on him, and he was also a friend of life and death with Bai Jian. As for Lei Dingtian, whether they would meet again was another question altogether. The stage 9 geniuses of the other two realms had no grudges with him, so they naturally wouldn't attack him for no reason. But if it was someone from the divine world who bore a grudge against him, they wouldn't go as far as to make a move against Lu Qianshan. Therefore, after much consideration, Xiaoyang felt that the only possibility was the Zhang family. However, Zhang Xianfeng was already dead. Even his soul was gone. How could he still cause trouble? There were too many questions, and there was no evidence to support them. In the divine tomb, of course, finding opportunities was the most important thing. Therefore, it was not bad to take one step at a time. If he had the time to ponder over things that he couldn't be sure of, he might as well comprehend a few more inscriptions. Even if he couldn't get many benefits, he could still accumulate them. Even if he could master all of those things, he would be able to obtain many benefits in the end. On the path of cultivation, fighting for opportunities was sometimes just like this. Along the way, Xiaoyang's luck was really bad. He almost didn't get a trace of divine decree. It was as if his good luck had been used up previously. That was why there was such a situation. Xiaoyang wasn't discouraged. After all, he had obtained quite a lot of benefits. Moreover, his plan was just to go to the center to try his luck. If he was lucky enough, he might be able to get some more things. However, if he was unlucky, then he could only leave. Not long after he left, Xiaoyang once again felt the fluctuation of power. He was very clear about that familiar feeling. It was a battle between the dead spirits and human cultivators. Xiaoyang was still troubled by this before. Therefore, this time he didn't hesitate to go over. He wanted to see if he could find any clues. Very quickly he saw a cultivator in the sky, continuously waving the large blade in his hand. Immediately, streams of blade, qi, continuously slashed out. It was extremely tyrannical. On the other hand, the undead spirit was extraordinary. It didn't fight head-on, but instead dodged all of the tyrannical blade qi. It could be said that its movements were exquisite. The cultivator seemed to be infuriated because of this. He lost his sense of propriety and became even more impatient. When he attacked, there was no technique to speak of. He only cared about the powerful energy pouring out, wanting to directly hack the undead spirit to death. On the other hand, the undead spirit performed very well. It constantly dodged the fatal blade qi. Even if the black mist was hit, as long as it wasn't injured, it could rely on the death aura to recover very quickly. Not long after, the blade-wielding man began to lose his strength, and his attacks became much slower. Xiaoyang was not in a hurry to make a move. His spiritual sense quietly spread out. This time, he was determined to find the person behind the scenes. Now, Xiaoyang somewhat admired this person. He knew that he couldn't afford to provoke him. Now he began to look for people with lower strength to make a move. Since they met again this time, there was naturally no need for him to continue to stand by and watch. No matter what, he had to ferret that person out and find out who was behind all this, and what exactly he was plotting. However, Wherever his thoughts passed, Xiao Yang's final result was that he found nothing. He couldn't find any traces of him within a radius of 10 miles. He didn't know where that person was and what kind of method he used to be able to control the undead from a distance. It was really hard to imagine. On the other hand, the blade-wielding man seemed to be exhausted. He couldn't hold on any longer. The undead spirit had penetrated his body several times, leaving behind a lot of death aura that invaded his body. In this short period of time, the blade-wielding man's face had turned jet black. It was obvious that the death aura had invaded his body. If he didn't make a move now, the blade-wielding man would probably be severely injured. He wouldn't even be able to protect his heart meridians and divine sense. At that time, if he was attacked by the death aura, it would be a bit more troublesome. Unable to find the person behind the scenes for a long time, Xiao Yang could only grit his teeth and stop thinking about it. Saving that person first was the most important thing. After all, it wasn't Xiao Yang's style to leave someone in the lurch. In the next moment, a sword intent appeared, and the thunder fire divine sword suddenly appeared. With a swing of the sword, the undead seemed to feel threatened and fled at the sight of the wind. But at this time it was already too late. This sword had already been thrust out. Immediately, a sword chi of thunder and fire poured out, directly strangling the black mist. The divine soul within was even cut into pieces, severing its past and future lives. Chapter 1756. The sword-wielding man only saw that after a sword light, the undead spirit was completely strangled. He was dumbfounded. He felt that this was really infuriating. He had fought for so long and was seriously injured, but the other party really finished him off with a single sword. How powerful was the other party to be able to do this? The sword-wielding man's Adam's apple rolled, and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He looked at the place that had turned dark in disbelief, leaving only a burnt smell. At this time, Xiao Yang also immediately put away his sword and flew into the sky. He looked around and found that it was calm and peaceful, and he didn't see the existence of other cultivators. Originally, he wanted to use this method to scare away that person. As long as he moved, he would definitely be discovered. But the result was so unsatisfactory. That person was really too cautious. He couldn't see the slightest trace of him, and he didn't know where he was hiding. Even if he searched with his divine sense, he still couldn't find anything. Xiao Yang! The sword-wielding man took a breath of cold air and said in shock. This time, they naturally recognized the person who entered the divine tomb as a rank 9 supreme expert. Originally, he was still wondering which rank 9 supreme expert came to help, but he didn't expect it to be the current chief. Xiao Yang lowered his head and looked at the sword-wielding man. His face was rough and he had a full beard. He was like a swordsman in the Jianghu, burly and rough. The sword-wielding man put the big sword on his shoulder, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a happy expression, as if it was his great honor to see the current chief. He was very happy and felt satisfied. Thank you, Brother Xiao, for your help. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I would have been killed by that undead spirit. The sword-wielding man said with a silly smile. His voice was very imposing, like a large bell. Xiao Yang smiled indifferently, nodded slightly, and continued to observe the surroundings closely, trying to find some clues. However, the other party seemed to be very patient. If he didn't show up, he couldn't find him at all. Brother Xiao, do you think the scenery above is much better? So you don't want to come down and talk? The sword-wielding man continued to raise his voice, as if he was afraid that others couldn't hear him, and shouted loudly. He didn't know if this person's personality was like that. At least from the way he dressed, it seemed to be the case. Therefore, Xiao Yang did not mind and slowly descended. Since the other party was proficient in concealment, it was obvious that they were well prepared to do such sneaky things. It seemed that it would not be an easy task to find out who he was. He needed to think about it carefully. When you were fighting with the undead, did you feel that something was wrong? Xiao Yang asked. Now he could be sure that this was not a vendetta. What was the reason for this seemingly random search for a target? No one could figure it out. Therefore, it was difficult to deduce who was behind this. The man with the saber frowned slightly. After thinking for a while, he said, "I feel like every slash of my saber is like a clay ox entering the sea. It doesn't feel good." As he spoke, the man seemed very unhappy and sullen. Since he had no way to deal with them, it was extremely strenuous for him to fight these dead spirits. Xiaoyang had also seen that this man was proficient in saber techniques. Moreover, he was also known for his domineering strength. Naturally, he would have some shortcomings when dealing with undead spirits. It was indeed troublesome for him to face such a thing. In the future, when you meet a dead spirit, you must first find its real body before you attack. Xiaoyang said indifferently. He also felt rather helpless towards this burly man, as if he had a lot of muscles and boundless strength, but he just didn't have a brain. The man scratched his head with a smile, as if he already knew. "You should get rid of the death aura first. I'll keep an eye on it for you." Xiaoyang said indifferently. The man replied. After a few polite words, he began to adjust his breathing and expel the death aura. Regarding this matter, Xiaoyang did not say anything to this person whom he had met by chance, because, with this voice, if he were to say what he was thinking, it would probably be spread far and wide. At that time, it would be difficult. Since he didn't see anything, then there was no need to say anything more. Otherwise, he would think too much and cause irreparable consequences. Xiaoyang glanced at him and discovered that this man's muscles were indeed a bit exaggerated. A feeling of a fierce man could be said to be coming from his face. Those thick muscles were like a natural defensive magical artifact. The broadsword looked ordinary, but upon closer inspection, it was a high-grade heaven-level artifact. Although a high-grade heaven-level artifact was nothing in Xiaoyang's eyes, it was still a high-grade artifact compared to him. Normally, top geniuses would only be high-grade heaven-level. Only Xiaoyang was different. He used whatever he could get, and with the prize of being the champion, he had so many artifacts in his hands. However, there was only one Xiaoyang in the world. There was no second one. As for those monstrous existences, such as Lei Dingtian, their status was even more extraordinary. Soon after, Xiaoyang did not look and immediately flew up into the sky again, trying to find clues. However, this time he searched for a long time but could not find any trace of the person. One had to admit that the person hiding in the dark this time was more cautious than last time. He did not leave behind any clues. After a long time, the man with the broadsword also dispelled all the death chi. He stood up and stretched his body. Suddenly, all the bones in his body were twisted and cracked. Hearing this sound, the corner of Xiaoyang's mouth twitched slightly. This guy was really a muscle maniac. Just how much training and improvement did he have to reach such a level? Brother Xiao, could it be that the scenery here is much better? As the man spoke, he picked up his broadsword and flew to Xiaoyang's side. He looked around and muttered, "There's no difference. It's still gray." Looking at this blockhead, Xiaoyang felt a sense of helplessness rise in his heart. Now, if he wanted to clarify some things with him, it would be like playing the lute to a cow. Therefore, he did not need to waste his effort. This time, thank you for helping me. If you have any instructions in the future, don't hesitate to ask. Don't be polite with me. The blockhead smiled honestly and was very happy. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded. It's nothing. If you encounter such situations in the future, be careful. The blockhead still smiled honestly and nodded repeatedly. Oh, right, I'm from the Greenly world. My name is Song Zhongling. The blockhead seemed to have thought of something and smiled foolishly. After so long, he finally remembered to introduce himself. Chapter 1757. Song Zhongling smiled innocently, looking harmless. His simple and honest look made people feel at ease. Although he looked a little uncouth, one's appearance was a reflection of one's heart. Usually, people like him were burly and would not have any ulterior motives. They were all straightforward. Xiaoyang from the flowing cloud realm, Xiaoyang also extended his hand and said with a smile, since the other party had introduced himself, Xiaoyang naturally could not be rude. After all, in this world, it was not bad to be able to make a few more friends. Xiaoyang had heard a little about the Greenly realm. It was a very low-key place. This was because some of them had entered the final competition, but all of them had given up on fighting for the championship. Instead, they chose to cultivate in seclusion. They were extremely low-key. Perhaps they felt that it was enough for them to enter the tomb of the god of sin. As for fighting for the championship, they were not strong enough, so they did not bother. Moreover, in comparison, the opportunities in the tomb of the god of sin were more important. They were not from the god realm, so what was the point of winning the championship? If it were not for the fact that there was a rank 9 almighty in the Greenly realm, many people would have subconsciously ignored them. They were too low-key, which was why they were like this. However, the young rank 9 prodigy, who had been living in seclusion ever since he came to the god realm and kept a very low profile, was an existence that could not be denied. It could be said that the god realm tournament was just the beginning. However, after it ended, more people had their eyes on the 5 rank 9 prodigies. They were the pinnacle of existence. Perhaps they could break through to that level during this trip to the tomb of the god of sin. Although there was an additional unrivaled god, there were now 6 of them. However, many people were still not optimistic about unrivaled god. This was because he had just entered rank 9 and his foundation was not stable yet. Now that he wanted to use this opportunity to break through to that level, it was undoubtedly a fool's dream. Brother Xiao, I admire you very much. Back then in the Black Tortoise Arena, when I saw you defeat Luo Ku and the insufferably arrogant Xinzhuang, it was still vivid in my mind. If only I could be like Brother Xiao, how satisfying would that be? Song Zhongling said with a smile. He also seemed to recall the previous great battle, which left him with a rich aftertaste. It was very comfortable. Xiaoyang only smiled indifferently. He didn't care about these flattery at all. However, I really have to thank Brother Xiao for your help this time. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid that I would have died here today. You're my friend for sure. Song Zhongling laughed loudly and said. Xiaoyang nodded slightly. Although this boorish man didn't seem to have any malicious intentions, he still understood that people were sinister. It was the first time they had met, yet she was already so enthusiastic. Her personality was one thing, but there might be another. What's wrong? Is Brother Xiao looking down on me? Do you think I don't deserve to be your friend? Song Zhongling said unhappily when he saw the grave expression on Lin Fan's face. His tone was filled with complaints and disappointment. When Xiaoyang heard this, she immediately waved her hand and said, That's not what I meant. Just now, I suddenly remembered why that undead spirit chased after you for no reason. Of course, this was just a prevarication. It's nothing. I just found a stone tablet a little bit ahead. After comprehending it, who knew that the undead spirit would attack me relentlessly? As Song Zhongling said, he also pointed to the front. Looking up, there was indeed a stone tablet. If this was the case, then some problems could be explained. Of course, that explanation was only for Song Zhongling, not Xiaoyang, because no matter how one looked at it, this incident didn't seem to be a coincidence. It was someone's deliberate move. It was just a pity that it was hidden too deeply. There was no way to dig it out from the dark at all, which made people very annoyed. Even though Xiaoyang's ability was not bad, and his divine sense was even more powerful, it was still difficult for him to do these things. Why? Xiaoyang, do you feel something is wrong? Song Zhongling asked with some doubts. A simple and honest look, as if I don't know anything, but I'm very curious. What happened? Is it targeted at me? Xiaoyang could only shake his head, helplessly. This person's temperament was really a bit strange, but he didn't care. Instead, he was thinking about how to fish out the person behind the scenes. If he wanted to cooperate with Lu Qianshan, it would be impossible. After all, this person's voice was unusually loud. Moreover, cooperating with Lu Qianshan couldn't fish him out. Cooperating with this person was even more difficult to succeed. Of course, it was also possible that the person in the dark was already a frightened bird, and with the appearance of Xiaoyang he had already fled. At this time the simple and honest man took out a lot of firewood out of thin air, put it on the ground, and made a pile of fire. Under the rampant death chi, it seemed to want to extinguish these flames, but the simple and honest man waved his hand and blocked it with spiritual power. Suddenly, a trace of fragrance was constantly emitted. Obviously, this wood was a good incense wood. These things were very precious to mortals, but to cultivators they were not enough. If one had the leisure, they could find as much as they wanted. "What are you doing?" Xiaoyang asked with some doubts. Song Zhongling sat on the ground, took out a few pieces of good meat, and roasted them on the fire, and said, "Today I am fortunate to have met Brother Xiao. Naturally, I have to celebrate with good food and wine. This can be considered as a small thank you for your help." As the simple and honest man said, he began to take out some seasonings skillfully and began to smear oil, looking like a professional chef. Looking at the meat in front of him, the corners of Xiaoyang's mouth twitched slightly. After entering the divine tomb, he really didn't eat anymore. Although these things were dispensable for them, sometimes the desire to eat still needed to be satisfied. "Brother Xiao, don't worry, my cooking skills are very good. When I was in the sect, even if my master was angry, as long as I roasted meat, he would not punish me. If one meal is not enough, then two," Song Zhongling said, but his eyes were still on the barbecue. If he couldn't beat the dead spirit, then roasting meat was a must. After a while, the fragrance came out. Suddenly, Xiaoyang couldn't help but raise his thumb and said, "Brother Song really knows how to live." Song Zhongling grinned, looking very happy. "Brother Xiao knows his stuff." Song Zhongling chuckled. Being praised like this was the best thing that could happen to him. Chapter 1758. Song Zhongling's movements could be said to be very familiar. When to put in the seasoning could be said to be just right. Moreover, he was constantly roasting the meat so that it was more evenly heated, so that it would not be burnt for too long. It was a bit golden, but that was just right. That refreshing fragrance made people feel refreshed, and their appetite was greatly stimulated. They were even a bit drooling. Especially that rich fragrance, it was even more irresistible, as if they wanted to eat to their heart's content. It seemed that now nothing was more important than eating. This was also the profound attainment of a chef. As long as he made a move, then it would be able to arouse people's appetite. It could also be seen that this Song Zhongling was a very particular person. The incense wood he used would not be able to grow to this extent unless it was hundreds of years old. Moreover, it was very rare. Ordinary incense wood could not be able to integrate the fragrance into the meat. In addition, the meat was not simple. It was not ordinary meat. It must be from the body of a ferocious beast or a ferocious existence. I don't have any hobbies, but I am very addicted to roasting meat. In the past, when I had nothing to do, I liked to go deep into the mountains and forests to hunt ferocious beasts. Not to mention that the meat of these beasts is really rough and hard to swallow. Only a part of it is very chewy and comfortable to eat. As if in his own domain, Song Zhongling also opened his mouth to talk. Xiaoyang just smiled. There were not many cultivators who could experience life like this. After all, many people felt that it was meaningless. For cultivators, what was the most important thing? Naturally, it was to constantly cultivate and break through, step by step until you reach the heavens. Because of this, I was really punished a lot. But later, the sect found out that I used ferocious beasts to temper my cultivation, and then used the flesh of those beasts to improve my cultivation. My cultivation was faster, so I was recognized. How is eating a meaningless thing? It is obviously the most important thing. Song Zhongling said honestly. Xiaoyang thought for a moment and said, "Indeed." In the past, Xiaoyang had also used the corpse of the berserk thunder ape to improve himself. At that time, the Anya clan had benefited greatly. Many cultivators had broken through their realms on his flying ship. It could be said that they had made rapid progress. He even left the remaining muscles in North Light City. By the time he returned, his team's strength would have been greatly improved. In that case, Xiaoyang was also looking forward to it. He was even thinking that he should pay more attention in the future and kill a few more ferocious beasts if he encountered one. Although it was not very useful to him, it was a completely different concept to his friends. Brother Xiao also knows his stuff. Since we hit it off so well, why don't we travel together? You kill the spirit while I roast the meat. Wouldn't that be perfect? Song Zhongling said, looking at the oil dripping into the firewood and making sizzling sounds. This request was really hard to refuse. Brother Xiao, you don't have to worry about fortuitous encounters. After all, whether one can obtain the divine decree or not depends entirely on one's fate. Moreover, I've already checked the itinerary. It would be a pity if we don't go to the central area to try our luck, Song Zhongling continued. It was well known that the center of the tomb of the god of sin was the place with the greatest opportunities. That place could be said to be full of opportunities. It was just a matter of whether one could seize them. However, this idea coincided with Xiaoyang's following itinerary. He said, in that case, it's still on the way. Okay, then thank you for taking care of me along the way. But don't worry, I won't be stingy. I still have a lot of inventory. Song Zhongling said and patted his waist in satisfaction, looking like a rich man. Xiaoyang just smiled indifferently. A person who knew how to live naturally had everything prepared. Although the center of the tomb of the god of sin is dangerous, Brother Xiao doesn't have to worry about it. Our senior and junior brothers from the Greenly realm have already discussed and agreed to meet there. When the time comes, as long as that senior brother arrives, then our safety can be guaranteed. Song Zhongling thought and said, Xiaoyang naturally knew that senior brother. He was probably referring to the strongest genius in the Greenly realm, King Wu's 9th level existence. Back then, they had met once at the fairy pool, but the other party was very low-key and could not see the depth of his strength. If not for the fact that his seat was too conspicuous, probably no one would have noticed that gentle and elegant 9th level powerhouse in green robes. That person did not show off his abilities like Bai Jian, nor was he as domineering as Lei Dingtian, nor was he as noble as Princess Mingzhu. He only had an aura that was no different from that of an ordinary person. Don't be fooled by my senior brother's low-profile appearance. His strength is really strong and he's a good person. So don't worry, he won't be ostracized. Song Zhongling said and handed a piece of meat to Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony. He nodded and took a bite. Immediately, his taste buds were greatly satisfied. It was as if every bit of taste filled every corner of his mouth, floating in the air. This kind of feeling was very enjoyable. To be able to eat such delicious food in this lifeless place was really a happy thing. The gloominess from before was also swept away. Xiaoyang gave him a thumbs up and said, Brother Song, you didn't lie to me. Song Zhongling was clearly very satisfied with such praise. Soon after, he took out 2 jars of wine from his waist and handed one to Xiaoyang. He said, Only when there's meat and wine is it truly delightful. Although it's not as precious and heaven-defying as those in the divine realm, it's still personally brewed by my master. It's still extraordinary. Seeing the wine pushed over, Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony. He opened the ink pad and immediately a rich wine aroma rushed to his nose. Although it had not yet entered his mouth, he could tell from the rich aroma that it was indeed good wine. This time, Xiaoyang gave him a thumbs up again. This Song Zhongling did not seem to be here to experience life. He brought so many good things. It was as if he was here for an outing. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony and drank a big mouthful. It could be said that he was satisfied. Then, Song Zhongling also started to drink. He toasted Xiaoyang with a jar. The 2 of them ate barbecued meat and drank good wine. They talked about what they had seen and heard, as well as some opinions and explanations of cultivation. It could be said that good wine was the best thing to touch people's hearts. It made the gap between the two of them disappear. It could be said that they talked about everything they knew. Sometimes the happiest thing in life was probably like this. Good food, good wine, good friends. How happy was it to talk about the world? It seemed that their temperaments were also similar. They talked back and forth, and it could be said that life was happy. Suddenly, Xiaoyang frowned. It was unknown whether it was because he was drunk or something else, but he lost his composure. Song Zhongling, on the other hand, looked like he was drunk. He smiled eerily. Chapter 1759. Both of them enjoyed themselves to the fullest. In the end, both of them looked a little drunk. Their faces were red as they laid on the ground, not much different from a drunkard, especially Song Zhongling, who was snoring thunderously. Obviously, he was drunk. Moreover, he trusted the people around him. That was why he fell asleep without any precaution. Only a careless person would be like this. The incense hadn't finished burning yet. It was still burning, emitting a refreshing fragrance. However, the barbecued meat was in their stomachs. There were even 6 empty wine jars scattered all over the place. It looked a little messy. Xiaoyang looked at the gloomy sky and thought to himself, what kind of situation was it back then that caused that powerful senior to not hesitate to turn this place into a land of death and bury everyone here? However, it made one understand a problem. If one was too arrogant and offended too many people, it would lead to a group attack. So what if the God realm was so strong? Didn't they still fall into the 3,000 small worlds? After falling, the God realm was still the strongest existence. However, it was no longer the phoenix's tail. It was the chicken's head. The difference between the two could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth. It could not be compared. The current God realm did look strong and prosperous. It was the strongest existence among the 3,000 small worlds. However, compared to the 3,000 small worlds, it would be like a big sorcerer meeting a small sorcerer. The great Tao was merciless. The strong would win, and the weak would be eliminated. However, one had to admit that the God realm had good methods. Even after such a long time, it still did not decline. Although it was not as strong as before, it was still a thing of the past. It was nothing. Time slowly passed. As he listened to the snoring sound, Xiaoyang helplessly let out a bitter laugh. Under such circumstances, it could be said that he was extremely baffled. After a while, Xiaoyang sat up. Looking at Song Zhongling, who was lying on the ground, a murderous intent flashed. However, he hid it very well and did not expose it. Song Zhongling, on the other hand, turned his body sideways. Only then did his snoring become much softer and less intense than before. Looking at the burning flames, Xiaoyang seemed to have lost interest. In the blink of an eye, he began to nourish the heavenly Qin mountain in his acupuncture points. The road ahead was long, and they didn't know what kind of powerful enemies they would face. Therefore, it was best for them to recover as soon as possible. Even if it was a big battle, they would still have magical artifacts to use. The Tianqin mountain was a saint-level ritual implement, and its power was extraordinary. Although it was somewhat powerless against a powerful existence like Lei Dingtian, it was still very useful against King Wu of the 8th level. Moreover, as Xiaoyang's strength increased, so would the Tianqin mountain. How much power a magic tool could unleash depended entirely on the person controlling it. It could be said that the grade of the magic tool determined the lower limit of its power, and the person controlling it determined the upper limit of its power. After a few hours, Song Zhongling finally woke up. He shook his head violently, as if he was drunk and had yet to sober up. After the two of them exchanged a few pleasantries, Song Zhongling carried his long sword on his back and continued on with Xiaoyang. Along the way, they also chatted intermittently. Occasionally, when they came across a stone tablet, they would sit down and study it together. As for how much they could obtain, it depended on their own abilities. There were no disputes, and it could be said that they were very harmonious. In fact, there was nothing to fight over. It was not a magic tool, and as long as one was strong enough, one could take it. This could be said to be completely dependent on one's own opportunities and comprehension. After that meal, the relationship between the two of them seemed to have become closer. Song Zhongling was also very talkative. Most of the time he was the one talking. He introduced the Greenly realm to Xiaoyang, saying that their hometown had 3 famous wonders. It could be said to be a paradise on earth, and it was wonderful beyond words. There was even a dangerous place called the Bamboo Waves, which contained the Great Tao. If one could comprehend the mantra there, it would be twice the result with half the effort, as if heaven and earth were working together. As for his senior brother, Han Fenglu, who was at the 9th level of the Greenly realm, he had comprehended in the Bamboo Waves and obtained a chance. Since then, he had not been at the 9th level. This was not just a simple rumor. Many cultivators had benefited from the Bamboo Waves. For example, Song Zhongling had also broken through to the 8th level there. However, Han Fenglu was the most special and had the highest achievement, so he became the spokesperson of the Bamboo Waves. Xiao Yang did have some yearning for it, but that place was not very useful to him now. Speaking of the 9th level genius Han Fenglu, Song Zhongling was in high spirits as if he was Han Fenglu. He was not stingy with his praise. Xiao Yang also learned about Han Fenglu's realm. He was actually at the 9th level of the upper tier, the same as Lei Dingtian. It could be said that he was at the peak of the 9th level. Even Bai Jian and the one from the Sun Snow realm were only at the beginning of the 9th level. Compared to them, they were much inferior. However, Han Fenglu's limelight was not as good as Bai Jian's. He was the lowest among the 9th level geniuses. That was because he was too low-key, and it was easy to overlook him. However, it was often such low-key people who did not get into trouble easily and did not attract the attention of others. For example, when the 9th level geniuses of the younger generation were mentioned, many people would first think of Princess Mingzhu, followed by Lei Dingtian and Bai Jian. As for the 2 or 3 people behind, they did not care. Of course, this was also related to their temperaments. They did not like to be in the limelight and lived in seclusion. From Song Zhongling's adoration for Han Fenglu, it could be seen that Han Fenglu wasn't arrogant when he was in the sect. He took special care of his junior brothers and never bullied them or anything like that. He would even answer their questions and was very kind. Along the way, Xiaoyang had more or less gained some understanding of the Greenly world. However, he still had some yearning for the so-called 3 wonders. If there was a chance in the future, then there was no harm in going to take a look. Maybe there would be some different discoveries. At this time, Song Zhongling stopped moving forward, and his expression became much more serious. Xiaoyang also felt that the deathly aura in front was exceptionally heavy. There was even a manic aura in it. It was very terrifying, and it was mixed with a destructive power. It was shocking. It was unbelievable. What kind of power could turn this place into purgatory? Chapter 1760. There were ruins in front of them. There were potholes everywhere, and broken walls crisscrossed each other. It could be said that it was a scene of devastation. It was hard to imagine what kind of powerful force had destroyed this place to cause such a situation. It made people have a lot of doubts in their hearts. It was difficult to figure out the horror of the war back then. The death aura here was many times richer than outside. Occasionally, some dead spirits could even be seen drifting by. However, these dead spirits seemed to have lost their consciousness. They floated without consciousness. It was impossible to tell whether they were good or evil or fierce. However, the aura of these dead spirits was very weak. Compared to those in the periphery, their strength was worlds apart. There were also some differences between those dead spirits and those in the periphery. They seemed to be drifting aimlessly. Some of them were lying on walls or mountain peaks, and there was no sign of movement at all. This was a little confusing. Although those dead spirits saw Xiaoyang and Song Zhongling, they did not emit any malice. They even turned a blind eye to them. Xiao Yang was also a little curious. The atmosphere here was particularly different from the outside. It was really a little strange. Moreover, the death aura inside was richer, but the dead spirits were much more harmonious. There were no stone tablets in sight, nor were there any fortuitous encounters. Brother Xiao, these dead spirits seem harmless, and their strength is not very strong, but we must be careful. If these things join forces, they can't be underestimated. Song Zhongling swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with some lingering fear. This was also what his master had told him. He must be careful in this matter. Otherwise, he might fail miserably. Xiao Yang nodded slightly. Although he couldn't see any clues, the tomb of the god of sin revealed too many strange things. If something really went wrong, the consequences would be unimaginable. As the saying goes, caution is the parent of safety. Sometimes, just a little carelessness might cause one to fall into a situation of eternal damnation. It was very likely that one would never be able to recover from this setback. Let's wait here for my fellow disciples to come and meet up. It will be much safer if we join forces. Song Zhongling said. Xiao Yang nodded. They had talked about this on the way here. In some places in the center of the tomb of the god of sin, there were great opportunities, but at the same time there were also extremely high risks. If one was not careful, one might die, or even stay in this place forever. If they worked together and went in together, they could rely on each other. Then, the situation would naturally be much better. Of course, the most important point was that Han Fenglu was in existence at the peak of the 9th step. His strength was trustworthy. With a level 9 expert overseeing things, they were indeed much safer. As for what kind of opportunities they had, perhaps they would meet in other places. However, it was different inside the divine tomb. You didn't need to fight for it at all. As long as you were fated, you could get the opportunity. No one could covet it. However, if they were not fated to meet each other, they would not be able to obtain it even if they killed everyone. It was also for this reason that in the divine tomb, other than those who had mortal enemies who would fight, most of the time, people would work together to resist the dead spirits and tomb keepers, supporting each other. If Brother Xiao feels bored, then you can go in and take a look. As long as you don't go too deep, some ordinary dead spirits won't be able to do anything to you. Of course, the periphery of the center must have been plundered, so there aren't many opportunities. Song Zhongling said with a smile. Xiao Yang nodded. He was clear about this. Many people came to the center of the divine tomb to look for opportunities. After exploring again and again, there were not many left. Moreover, they were not strong enough to continue moving forward, and no one could help them. Therefore, they could only look at the sea and sigh. How long do we have to wait? Xiao Yang asked. Song Zhongling frowned slightly. After thinking for a moment, he said, It's hard to say. After all, our original plan was to look around for a while and then come to the center to meet up. Hearing this, Xiao Yang felt quite helpless. However, the divine tomb could not be compared to the outside world, where one could communicate freely. In the divine tomb, it could be said that there were too many things suppressed and many magical powers were difficult to use. It could be said that one's hands and feet were tied, and it was difficult to use them. Brother Xiao, don't worry, it won't take long. We people from the Greenly world also know the importance, and know that we can't stay in the divine tomb for too long. Song Zhongling saw that his companion was a little unhappy, so he added. Hearing this, Xiao Yang nodded slightly and said, Since that's the case, I'll go in and take a look while there's still time. If you want to leave, just release your aura. When I sense it, I'll come out as soon as possible. If he kept waiting here, it would really be a little boring. Therefore, there was still some time, so he might as well go in and take a look and adapt to the environment. Song Zhongling looked at the dead spirits floating or lying inside, thought for a moment, and said, Okay, Brother Xiao, don't worry. These dead spirits seem to be harmonious, and I don't think they have the intention to harm anyone. Xiao Yang wasn't sure if these dead spirits had the intention to harm anyone, but he felt that with Song Zhongling's cultivation, he could still deal with them. After Xiaoyang gave a few instructions, he strode forward, ready to go in and take a good look. Song Zhongling sat on the ground, looking at the departing figure and the floating dead spirits. He couldn't help but shiver subconsciously, looking a little scared. Immediately, Song Zhongling took out the incense wood again to start a fire, and methodically took out the meat, ready to continue roasting it. In Song Zhongling's opinion, these dead spirits were terrifying, but as long as he had delicious food, what was there to be afraid of? This boorish man seemed to have such a temperament. As long as there was food, he would be bold and fearless. In fact, he was just trying to boost his courage. Looking at so many dead souls, he still felt a little scared. However, since Xiaoyang had left, he also had to wait here, so he didn't dare to act rashly and could only do this. The flames burned, and traces of heat spread out, making this cold world not so cold. On one side, the dead spirits floated freely, doing nothing, while the cultivators outside cooked in an orderly manner, enjoying themselves. The two sides lived in harmony. Chapter 1761. Under this gloomy sky, there were many dead spirits drifting aimlessly. Some were even lying cross-legged. It could be said that they were alternating vertically and horizontally. A man in white was walking on the ground, looking like he had nothing to do. He seemed very relaxed and did not seem to be under any pressure at all. However, that was only on the surface. Now, Xiaoyang did not feel that way. He was extremely nervous and vigilant. This was because he did not know what the situation was like here. Back then, he had been rather pressed for time, so he knew very little about the tomb of the god of sin. Although Unrivaled God had told him a lot about the tomb of the god of sin, that was only to the periphery. Unrivaled God could not be blamed for this. In his opinion, although Xiaoyang was the champion of the grand competition, he had not reached rank 9. If he came to the center alone to look for opportunities, he would probably suffer a great loss. If they could meet, there would be nothing to worry about. The dead spirits drifting or lying cross-legged around him did not seem to have any ill intentions. But who knew if they would suddenly go berserk? Xiaoyang did not dare to act rashly and let these dead souls completely turn into nothingness. If that happened, it would be hard to say what the result would be. If these dead spirits really gathered together, or if they startled some more powerful dead spirits, he would really be asking for trouble. He was very clear about the pros and cons of this. Therefore, he came here this time just to get used to the environment here in advance. Sure enough, it was similar to what he had expected. In the center of the tomb of the god of sin, he was especially suppressed, and the pressure he felt was even greater. The reason for this was very simple. It was none other than the death chi that was causing trouble. A completely opposite force would naturally make people feel even more pressured. If a rank 5 cultivator like King Wu were to come here, even breathing would become very difficult. He might even find it difficult to resist. No matter how low his level was, he might not be able to withstand the immense pressure and fall right here. It was very normal for him to be unable to resist, and he might even be devoured by the dead spirits in the end. It was said that the benefits here were unparalleled and that it was a place that every cultivator dreamed of coming to. However, that was only the case for those who had the ability to do so. If one's strength was not enough, coming here would probably be a hell on earth, or even 1,000 deaths without reincarnation. After walking for a long time, Xiaoyang found some stone tablets, but they were no different from what he said before. Although the stone steels were still engraved with inscriptions, the words on them had lost all of their divine intent, turning into ordinary stone steels. They were completely useless to cultivators. As for the words recorded on it, they were not even worth mentioning. This was because the writings on it were completely based on divine will, and it was impossible to understand what was engraved on it. Furthermore, some of the characters were clearly not from the god realm. Therefore, there was no way to identify it. Shortly after, Xiaoyang released a trace of his aura. It was the lightning aura that was specially used to restrain the undead. Immediately, some changes happened to the surrounding dead spirits. The originally peaceful scene disappeared without a trace at this moment. As for those dead spirits, they also became somewhat manic, as if they were accumulating power and were about to go crazy. In an instant, Xiaoyang kept all of these auras. After a while, those dead spirits regained their calmness and were no longer as manic as before. This also allowed Xiaoyang to come to a conclusion, and that was these undead were relatively harmonious on the surface. Perhaps it was because this was their heaven, so they would abide by the rules and would not take the initiative to attack the invading cultivators. However, once they sensed an aura that was unfavorable to them, they would instinctively protect themselves after being threatened. Their consciousness was also very simple. The sudden appearance of a disharmonious aura was obviously brought in by an outsider. Just now, those dead spirits were a little manic, but their gazes fell on Xiaoyang. If this continued, they would probably gang up on the intruder and kill him. From their point of view, this outsider was quite tactful. He did not take the provocation to heart. However, they had learned their lesson from before, and their gazes were always on the outsider. It seemed that they were carefully guarding against him, afraid that he would cause trouble when the time came. Seeing that these dead spirits still had some simple spiritual intelligence, Xiaoyang's heart was also sorrowful. The dead spirits here could not be judged with common sense. As for Jianyin, he was an exception. Because he had obtained his sword, he could maintain his consciousness. However, he also paid a considerable price, which was to burn his own death aura and could only watch himself disappear bit by bit. Moreover, the Thunder Fire Divine sword had too many characteristics and countless coincidences, which was why it was like this. With so many coincidences, it was naturally impossible for more than one person to have so many coincidences. Therefore, it was undoubtedly a fool's dream to let these dead spirits regain their spiritual intelligence. But with Xiaoyang's current capabilities, it was truly impossible for him to free himself from all of them. In fact, if he was rash, he might even pay a higher price. It was very likely that he would also die in this place. Therefore, Xiaoyang did not act rashly. Instead, he moved forward carefully, not daring to alarm these dead spirits. Now he just came in to get used to it. There was no need to make a big fuss. Moreover, there were many things that he did not understand about this place. Sometimes it was better not to act rashly. Who knew when he would cause a big trouble? After walking for a long time, Xiaoyang had some understanding of the central area, so he turned around and returned. After a few 100 miles, all the inscriptions he passed by had lost their divine intent and were worthless. This made Xiaoyang feel very helpless. That little bit of wishful thinking had disappeared without a trace. Sometimes it was useless to think too much. He also had some understanding of the characteristics of these dead spirits. As long as he did not let them feel threatened, he could still live in peace. If he did the opposite, the consequences could be imagined. The final result would be to be attacked by a group. If one wanted to scare them away, it would not work at all. As for fighting with all one's strength and killing them all, the result would be to continuously expand the battle group, which would attract more dead spirits and cause them to be exhausted to death here. Chapter 1762. Suddenly, there was a whiff of meat aroma. It was especially clear in this lifeless place and whetted one's appetite. Needless to say, it must be the boorish man from the Greenlee realm who had started his barbecue business again and was enjoying his life. One had to admit that Song Zhongling was indeed a person who knew how to live. Even under this hopeless sky, he could still find joy in the midst of misery. It seemed that, in his opinion, there was nothing that a barbecue meal could not solve. If it did not work, then he would have two. Therefore, it was easy for people like him to get along with others. Not to mention his image, his good cooking skills were enough to make many people admire him. Even though cooking wasn't very helpful on the path of cultivation, it could be used to pass the long and boring days. Similarly, it could also make cultivators more lively and not be too heartless. After smelling the delicious food, Xiaoyang closed his eyes and observed a stain in his sea of consciousness. Although the color was very faint and almost undetectable, he still found it. Moreover, since he got closer, the stain had expanded a lot, as if it wanted to invade the entire sea of consciousness. Xiaoyang did not care about the undetectable stain, and immediately quickened his pace and walked outside. Now that he thought about it, the barbecue was really too delicious. After smelling the aroma, he could not control himself and wanted to satisfy his cravings so that he would not feel so uncomfortable. It could be said that now Xiaoyang felt as if there were countless ants crawling in his heart. His heart was itching unbearably, thinking that he was about to eat the delicious food. Xiaoyang did not care so much and immediately quickened his pace. Soon he saw Song Zhongling. As expected, he sat on the ground and started his barbecue business again. Moreover, this time it was much more fragrant than the previous few times. It made people drool. And these dead souls were still unaware. They were still floating or circling, turning a blind eye to the delicious food. Between the two sides, the well water did not interfere with the river water and was very harmonious. When Song Zhongling saw that Xiaoyang had returned, a smile flashed across the corners of his mouth. Soon after, he asked, "Brother Xiao, how did the investigation go?" This man looked simple and honest. Although his smile was a little ugly, he looked harmless and gave people a sense of security. Xiaoyang sat in front of Song Zhongling and said, "The situation is like that. It's about the same as what you said. I felt bored and smelled delicious food, so I came back." Seeing Xiaoyang staring at the barbecued meat in his hand, Song Zhongling smiled with satisfaction, but no one knew why he was smiling. Haha, it seems that Brother Si Xiao is also a glutton. However, in life, if one did not eat more delicious food and drink more good wine, how could one be happy? In any case, we can't reach the end of our cultivation. As the saying goes, life is short. It's better to enjoy it as much as possible. Moreover, we cultivate to a higher realm for the sake of better enjoyment, Song Zhongling said with a smile. Song Zhongling was such a person. Everything did not seem so important. Every moment of enjoyment was the best. Xiaoyang also gave him a thumbs up and said, "Brother Song, you have great insight." That's indeed the case. If it wasn't for the sake of enjoying everything, why would we still cultivate? In this regard, Xiaoyang also had a look of deep agreement and seemed to be very happy. Despite the deathly aura, occasional gusts of cold wind, and the dead souls surrounding them, the two of them were still at ease and appeared to be extraordinarily comfortable. It was as if nothing could interrupt their current state, even if they were in danger. So what? Being able to have fun was the point of having a high state of mind. Song Zhongling did not stand on ceremony. He directly handed a piece of barbecued meat to Xiaoyang and took out some wine at the same time. You can eat as much meat as you want, but you should drink less wine. After all, we don't know when they will come. When we set off, we will still be drunk. That won't be good. Seeing that, Song Zhongling also advised earnestly. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony. He took the barbecued meat and took a bite, starting to eat heartily. As he chewed on the meat, he said in a muffled voice, "I understand." Seeing that Xiaoyang was very satisfied with his meal, and that he looked very satisfied, Song Zhongling's smile also became much wider. To a chef, the more satisfied the person was with their food, the more they would affirm their culinary skills. After Xiaoyang ate a few mouthfuls, he drank another mouthful of wine and shouted, "Great! Great!" This voice was very loud, and there was even a trace of power in it. Immediately, the undead spirits inside became restless again. It was obvious that they were threatened. Seeing this, Song Zhongling immediately made a hush gesture, indicating for his companions to be quiet and not disturb the guys inside. Xiaoyang also smiled embarrassedly. He was too engrossed in eating and forgot where he was. It was a little awkward. Fortunately, the undead spirits inside saw that there was no follow-up, so they quieted down a lot and were not as restless as before. However, they seemed to have noticed that their neighbors were a little noisy, so they began to move inside. This kind of change made Xiao Yang feel a little strange, so he asked, "Brother Song, why do you think these undead spirits left? Could it be that something is attracting them? I don't understand this either. Why don't we go and explore now? Maybe we can find some clues." Song Zhongling said. Xiao Yang shook his head and said, "Forget it now. It's not too late to go after I eat and drink." Song Zhongling did not speak and began to eat. After Xiao Yang ate and drank to his heart's content, he found that the undead spirits had returned again, but the number was much smaller. Naturally, it was impossible for him to investigate the situation now. At the same time, Xiao Yang also felt that the stain in his divine sense had expanded a lot again. Soon after, he fell to the ground and started snoring loudly as if he was drunk. When Song Zhongling saw this, the smile on the corner of his mouth became much wider. After that, he stood up and stretched his body. He appeared to be extremely indifferent. Looking at the undead spirits in front of him, Song Zhongling's hand moved slightly. Suddenly, there was a burst of cold wind, and fierce ghosts whistled. In an instant, everything was calm. Song Zhongling also began to roast meat again, as if he enjoyed this process very much. When Xiao Yang woke up, he found that there were a few more cultivators beside him. Each of them was dressed differently, and their temperaments were also very different. Chapter 1763. Xiao Yang sat up and first rubbed his head. It wasn't a headache after drinking, but he felt a little dazed, so he wanted to use this method to clear his head. Good wine wouldn't go to the head, but it seemed that because he had slept for a long time, it was inevitable that he would be a little dazed. So he wanted to clear his head. No matter how strong your mind was, if you were in an incomparably oppressive and gloomy environment, some changes would occur. Moreover, eating good food and wine every day would inevitably wear down one's mind. So it wasn't as pure as before. Song Zhongling saw that his companion was a little embarrassed after being drunk, but he wasn't angry. There was still a faint smile on his face, as if he was very satisfied with the situation at hand. Or perhaps Xiao Yang's current performance meant that his skills were indeed very good. Xiao Yang looked up and saw 3 people. They were all dressed differently, but one of them was delicate and pretty, giving off a feeling that he was a crane in a flock of chickens, extraordinary and refined. His eyes lit up. The 3 of them also looked at Xiao Yang, each with a different look in their eyes. This was especially true for the handsome man. His eyes were filled with astonishment. The other 2 had some reverence in their eyes. Who was Xiao Yang? He was the champion of the God Realm tournament and could be said to be a very popular existence in the God Realm. If it weren't for the continuous opening of the tomb of the God of Sin, which drew the attention of many people, his reputation would have risen again, and he would have become a very popular existence. Therefore, in this place, almost everyone knew who Xiao Yang was. However, Xiao Yang didn't know them. This is Xiao Yang, who defeated the God of Sin and won the tournament of the God Realm this time. With him joining, you too can be at ease now, right? Song Zhongling introduced with a smile. The 2 of them looked at Xiao Yang differently, and at the same time, they became much more determined. In their opinion, although the 5 of them were only King Wu rank 8, with the help of a freak like Xiao Yang, they could still go in and explore. Looking at the 2 of them, Xiao Yang also nodded slightly. From their actions, he already had a rough idea of the 3 newcomers. That handsome man was probably from the Greenly realm like Song Zhongling. As for those 2 people, one of them was from the immortal realm because their auras were very unique. As for the other person, it was hard to say. It was hard to judge from his aura, so he couldn't say anything. This is my senior brother. His name is Mo Yuan. Song Zhongling introduced, as he gestured towards the handsome man. When the handsome man saw Xiao Yang, he smiled and said, "I've heard a lot about you." The 2 of them exchanged a few pleasantries, but it was nothing more than flattery. Chu Chengfang of Soaring Cloud City. Tianhe Realms, Li Zheng. The 2 of them also introduced themselves without the slightest hesitation. Xiao Yang also smiled, although These people knew him. They still introduced themselves out of politeness. When Song Zhongling saw that the three of them were getting to know each other, he extinguished the fire. Then, with a flip of his hand, he buried the ashes in the ground. Everything returned to normal. Now that we've gathered, let's enter the center together and look for Big Senior Brother. Then, we'll look for opportunities together. What do you think? Song Zhongling said with a smile after seeing that the three of them were familiar with each other. Xiao Yang didn't have any objections. In his opinion, it didn't matter when they went in. As long as they could find Han Fenglu inside, then there was nothing to worry about. Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng saw that Xiao Yang was a stabilizing force, so they didn't have the slightest fear. Although they didn't know the strength of the two from the Greenly realm, Xiao Yang's fighting strength was obvious to all. Back then, Xiao Yang was already so powerful. After entering the divine tomb, who knew what kind of opportunities he would have and how powerful he would be? Seeing that the three of them didn't speak, Song Zhongling's gaze fell on the handsome man, as if he was asking for his opinion. It could be said that the two from the Greenly realm formed a sharp contrast. One was extremely boorish, while the other was extraordinarily handsome. Their auras could be said to be from different places, but they were from the same sect. Since no one has any objections, let's set off. Let's find Big Senior Brother first to avoid any mishaps. As Mo Yuan spoke, he subconsciously glanced at Xiao Yang, as if he was very worried about him. Song Zhongling also noticed this small change. He smiled slightly and didn't take it to heart. Brother Xiao, do you have any objections? Song Zhongling asked with a smile. Xiao Yang shook his head slightly and blurted out, I'll listen to Brother Song's arrangements. After Xiao Yang finished speaking, Song Zhongling also glanced at Mo Yuan proudly, as if he was showing off something. His smile was even more charming. However, Mo Yuan glared at Song Zhongling angrily, as if he expected better from him. Xiao Yang naturally took in the expressions of the two brothers. His heart also became heavier. That was because he had said those words almost immediately. It was clear that he was very anxious. Moreover, he didn't want to say it like that. As a result, Xiao Yang also felt that things had become interesting. This Song Zhongling was really quite capable. He wanted to follow them and see what kind of medicine they had up their sleeves. Although it was said that the opportunities here depended on fate, some places were guarded by dead spirits or tomb keepers. It wasn't easy to obtain those things. As for what they were planning, he could only follow them in to find out. At this time, Mo Yuan also began to talk about the things to take note of. It was nothing more than that it was very strange inside. Dead spirits roamed freely. Don't make a move easily or reveal your aura. When the time came, it would attract the dead spirits to attack in groups. Even if they were disturbed by the dead spirits, try to avoid as much as possible. Don't get into a conflict. But in the end, if there was no way to avoid, then take action together and kill those dead spirits in the shortest time possible. Then escape. Don't get caught up in the battle. If they encountered some powerful dead spirits or tomb keepers, then they would work together to fight. Don't hold back. As for the opportunities inside, it would depend on their own fate. Don't force it. Although he knew all this, Mo Yuan was still a little worried, so he repeated it again. After speaking, Mo Yuan took the lead, and Song Zhongling followed behind. They walked forward. Song Zhongling carried the broadsword on his back. After entering the central area, it immediately emitted a faint light, and the dead spirits retreated. Chapter 1764. The group of 5 was dressed in different clothes. They walked in an orderly manner under the gloomy sky. Deathly aura continuously rose around them, as if demons and ghosts were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws in an attempt to devour them. There were also many dead spirits floating around. Although they did not attack, they still gave off an eerie and terrifying feeling. The dead spirits here were indeed very peaceful, without the slightest trace of violence. They allowed the 5 outsiders to walk in their own territory as if they did not see them and did not attack. Between the two sides, it could be said that they minded their own business and were very harmonious. Xiaoyang had been here before, so he had some understanding of this place. Chu Qingfang and Li Zhang, on the other hand, felt a little strange when they saw this peaceful scene. This place was indeed a little different from the outside. At the same time, they were also curious and wanted to test it out. However, as soon as they released a trace of aura, Mo Yuan glared at them and stopped them. "If you want to cause trouble, don't implicate us. Or did I not make my words clear enough?" Mo Yuan questioned angrily. Chu Chengfang was speechless. He knew in his heart that he only wanted to test it out, but he was still the one in the wrong. Therefore, he did not try to defend himself. Instead, he lowered his head and did not say a word. However, he was a little displeased. He, Chu Qingfang, was the most powerful genius in the god realm of the 3,000 small worlds. "How dare you, a mere greenly world, scold me like this just because you roped in Xiaoyang?" However, when he thought of the many opportunities waiting for him, he did not think too much about it. After walking for a while, Li Jing also felt a little bored, so he said softly, "Brother Xiao, that battle of yours back then made my blood boil. We are both King Wu's rank 8. Why is there such a huge difference in strength?" Hearing these words, Xiaoyang was slightly taken aback as he let out a bitter laugh. Everyone had different opportunities and talents. There was nothing much to say. Of course, he naturally could not say this out loud. Otherwise, he would definitely offend someone. "Maybe my luck is better than yours," Xiaoyang said indifferently. Li Zhang raised his eyebrows slightly. It seemed that this explanation made him feel a little better. He was also a top 9 existence, but compared to Xiaoyang, he was like a firefly compared to the bright moon. "Brother Xiao is too modest. If there is an opportunity in the future, please bring this little brother out to explore and broaden my horizons," Li Zhang said after thinking for a while. Since he was so powerful, there must be a reason. Therefore, in Li Zhang's opinion, if he followed along, he might really be able to learn something under the influence of what he saw and heard. At that time, he would also benefit a lot. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded his head, but he didn't agree. After all, it was hard to say whether they were the same kind of people. They had only just met each other, so it was really meaningless to say too much at the beginning. Who knows what kind of bad things might happen? If Li Zhang had ulterior motives, then it was hard to say. In the Jianghu, one must be vigilant against people. The two of them started chatting casually, and the topics they talked about were all irrelevant. When Li Zhang asked, he also deliberately paid attention to the degree of sensitivity to avoid making the most powerful person in the team unhappy. It could be said that before seeing Han Fenglu, Xiaoyang was the most powerful among them. With his protection, many things would become much simpler. At least, there was no need to worry about safety. Song Zhongling walked the back and did not say a word. His gaze was constantly wandering around the surroundings, looking at those weak undead floating around. There was a lot of unhappiness on his face. If it were not for the fact that he could not afford to provoke them, he even wanted to take out the big knife on his back and kill these little things. Previously, he suffered a loss against an undead, so he inevitably felt a little gloomy in his heart. However, Song Zhongling did not lose his mind. He was still careful and did not vent those emotions. Chu Changfang, on the other hand, seemed a little unhappy. He had his own pride, but now he let the people of the Greenly realm take the lead. On the contrary, it felt like they were taking the lead, so he was very unhappy. Thinking of the opportunities in the center, he could only suppress this anger. But the more he thought about it, the angrier and more depressed he became. Among the 5, it could be said that each of them had their own thoughts and were different. Li Zhang, on the other hand, was much calmer. It was not easy for him to enter the divine tomb alone. It was naturally a good thing to be able to get a fortuitous encounter, but he did not think that he could do anything with his own strength. Therefore, the Greenly realm taking the lead was a timely reign. Of course, if he could make a few more powerful friends along the way, it would not be bad. After walking for a few hundred miles, they really walked into the center. other than a few dead spirits circling around the outside. There were no dead spirits in the next place they saw. Those weak and dense undead disappeared without a trace, replaced by an even more terrifying aura of death and destruction. Obviously, it was because the aura of destruction here was too strong that it made the undead uncomfortable, so they did not entrench themselves in this place. But if the undead could entrench themselves in this place, they were definitely not simple existences. Therefore, it was better to be careful for now. The disappearance of the undead did not make them feel relieved, but their mood became heavier. They knew very well that the undead they encountered next might not be the same as those outside, muddle-headed and non-aggressive. But the leader, Mo Yuan, did not show any signs of worry. Everything was normal as he led the way in front. Immediately, he took out a compass, looked at it for a while, and then changed direction and continued forward. After Li Jing asked, he found out that it was a secret technique of the Greenly realm that could find the location of their fellow disciples. This was also the reason why the four of them could meet up. It was because of this secret technique. Although Chu Qingfang was a little unhappy with Mo Yuan, this move made him feel a little better. At least, they could find Han Fenglu, who had reached the 9th level. With him leading the way, wouldn't they only need to follow to find a good opportunity? Li Zheng, on the other hand, was unperturbed. All of this seemed to be a matter of course to him, and there was nothing wrong with it at all. After walking for a few hundred miles, they saw a fire on a hillside. There was a person beside the fire. Chapter 1765. The bonfire on the hillside was like the only source of light under the gloomy sky. It was extremely dazzling. The 5 of them subconsciously raised their heads and looked over. As they looked over, they began to speculate in their hearts. Everyone's expression was different. They were all thinking about different things. There were 2 people sitting opposite each other around the bonfire. Because they were too far away, they could not see any details. However, Xiaoyang could clearly sense that one of them had a very strong aura. Although it was not overbearing or domineering, it was very long-lasting. If one did not pay attention, they would think that it was ordinary. However, such a steady flow of water also required a very strong control over it, especially Song Zhongling and Mo Yuan. They also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Now that they had met up with their eldest senior brother, they could sit back and relax. They also did not have to worry so much. With their eldest senior brother around, what problems could not be solved? In front of us is our eldest senior brother in the sect, Han Fenglu. Mo Yuan said excitedly. As soon as he said that, Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng immediately swallowed their saliva subconsciously. They could not help but feel a little excited. This time, they had formed an alliance because they valued Han Fenglu, who was in the greater 9th level. With him as her escort, she would have more confidence when facing many powerful and unknown opponents. The 2 of them were also delighted. It seemed that the cultivators of the Greenly realm were more warm-hearted and were willing to help them. This kind of feeling was also very beautiful and made people feel comfortable. Quietly, Mo Yuan also quickened his footsteps. It was as if he could not wait to directly step over. However, he could only hold back his remarkable powers and did not dare to act rashly. After all, if he alarmed something, there would be a lot of trouble. What's more, in this place, it was only about opportunities. To be able to obtain the opportunity safely without any disturbances was naturally the best choice. Xiaoyang continued to follow behind them unhurriedly. He seemed to be very compatible with them. Along the way, Xiaoyang had also quietly released his divine sense. He did not alert anyone, and he was also investigating the changes in his surroundings. Since leaving the periphery, there were no more undead, but there were more powerful undead. The weakest of those dead souls was comparable to King Wu's Tier 8. They were very tyrannical. However, Mo Yuan seemed to be very good at leading the way. The path he took avoided all of the dead spirits, and he didn't encounter any of them. The dead spirits couldn't sense him at all. This was a rare thing. Xiaoyang did not think that there was anyone in the same realm who could have a stronger spiritual sense than him. Or could it be that the compass he took out earlier had the effect of seeking luck and avoiding calamity? All of these were just Xiaoyang's guesses, and he couldn't make a decision. However, as for what exactly was going on, they would know once they followed them to take a look. He believed that if the cultivators of the Greenly world had ulterior motives, they would naturally give themselves away. Of course, if they didn't have any bad intentions, that would naturally be the best thing. After all, mutual benefit was what everyone wanted to see. However, his vigilance didn't make Xiaoyang completely trust the people around him. They were just strangers who met by chance, and people's hearts were unpredictable. He couldn't say when he would be stabbed in the back. Therefore, it was better to be careful. Soon, the 5 of them reached the top of the mountain. The 2 people in front of the fire immediately stood up and welcomed them with smiles. Xiaoyang's gaze fell directly on the cultivator with a long breath. This cultivator's face was like jade, and he had a gentle and elegant appearance. He held a folding fan in his hand, and he also had the demeanor of a scholar. His green robe could be said to be spotless. Even under the gray sky, his unique temperament was even more reassuring. It felt like a scholar would not have such a feeling. As for the other person, he looked very ordinary. It could be said that he was very ordinary. It was as if he could casually pull a person on the street and they would look like him. Eldest senior brother. Mo Yuan looked at the scholar holding the folding fan and greeted him. The scholar holding the folding fan smiled and nodded. I'm Han Fenglu from the Greenly world. Welcome to my team. Han Fenglu's voice was very gentle, like mellow wine, and it left a rich aftertaste. Her voice was soft, but it was still heard clearly. It was very pleasing to the ears. Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng also subconsciously lowered their heads. This was because when they looked at the person in front of them, they couldn't help but feel ashamed of their inferiority. It was as if their little thoughts before were simply too dark in front of the scholar. When Xiaoyang saw the scholar's gaze sweep over, he smiled slightly. It was considered that they had met. Although Han Fenglu was very gentle and gave people a feeling of being bathed in the spring breeze, Xiaoyang was a little shocked. This was because such a person with such a long breath would have a lot of twists and turns in his mind. As for whether this person in front of him was a true gentleman or a hypocrite, it wasn't something that could be seen with just one look. At least for now, Han Fenglu's demeanor was not bad, and he didn't show any repulsive arrogance. This kind of feeling was very good. If Han Fenglu's nature was really like what he was showing now, it would be very pleasing and comfortable to be friends with such a person. My 3 friends, my name is Gu Shan. The ordinary-looking cultivator also smiled and said, God Realms Chu Chengfang, Tianhe Realms Li Zheng. The 2 of them also introduced themselves one after another. Xiaoyang didn't say anything and only smiled. Of course, he didn't need to introduce himself. Right now, Xiaoyang was just like the 6th 9th Order young geniuses. Everyone knew who he was, and everyone knew who he was. Brother Xiao, although I didn't go to watch the battle between you and Shinduo after hearing about it, I was very eager to be friends with you. Han Fenglu said as he walked over and cupped his fists. When Xiaoyang saw this, he immediately cupped his fists in return and said, Brother Han, you're exaggerating. Compared to you, the battle between Shinduo and I is just a small one. It's nothing. You, on the other hand, have already reached the 9th level. I can't even catch up to you. Seeing that Han Fenglu was so polite to Xiaoyang and even humbled himself, Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng felt even more comfortable. Previously, they were still worried that Han Fenglu would be overbearing because he was strong and would inevitably be wronged. Now it seemed that they were wrong. Chapter 1766. Seeing Han Fenglu's attitude, Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng both felt more and more ashamed of their inferiority. This kind of demeanor did not have the slightest bit of arrogance to speak of. It was calm and pleasant, and could be said to be a modest gentleman. Especially Chu Qingfang, he was a person of the divine realm and had a unique pride. Therefore, he also felt more and more pain in his heart. The others were like this when they were at the 9th level, and he was only at the 8th level. Compared to them, he really had a taste of being half filled with water. Brother Xiao, please don't say that. I only relied on my family background and some luck to have today's achievements. Compared to Brother Xiao, who walked to where you are now with your own strength, I still pale in comparison, Han Fenglu said. Regarding this, Xiao Yang was not the slightest bit surprised. His background had long been thoroughly investigated, and after he became the champion of the large competition, it was likely that he had already been thoroughly investigated. Therefore, his identity could not be considered as a secret. This kind of feeling really made people feel a little uncomfortable. Xiao Yang shook his head and said, Brother Han, are you trying to kill me by flattering me? I still know how much my aptitude is worth. Compared to Brother Han, it's really a world of difference. Please don't say such words. Now, Li Jing did not care about this, and the original guilt also disappeared. Moreover, he was even more certain that with Han Fenglu leading the way, it was naturally excellent. As for this kindness, after leaving the divine tomb in the future, having a friend who had a chance of reaching that level in the future, no matter how one looked at it, was a great thing. Brother Xiao, please don't belittle yourself. If your aptitude is not good, then how many people will feel ashamed of their inferiority? You are the champion of the grand competition, the number 1 person of the 8th level, Han Fenglu said. Han Fenglu and Xiao Yang could be said to be mutually flattering each other. However, Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng did not take it seriously, because they felt that the two of them were indeed worthy of such praise. One of them was ranked in the top 10 of the younger generation, while the other was the champion of the competition, King Wu, who was at the peak of the 8th step. Of course, the only thing that made them a little uncomfortable was the two's modesty, which made them feel that they were somewhat useless. Xiao Yang sighed and said, that's still a rank 8. Compared to Brother Han's rank 9, it's still a far cry. Han Fenglu, on the other hand, didn't care at all. She consoled, so what? When Brother Xiao comes out of the divine tomb, his cultivation will definitely advance by leaps and bounds. It is only reasonable that he will catch up to us. On the other side, Mo Yuan and Song Zhongling did not care about the flattery of their eldest senior brother and that chief. They walked to Gu Shun's side and sat down, starting to talk about their daily lives. At the same time, the two of them looked at Gu Shun with smug and complacent gazes. It was as if he was saying, I, Song Zhongling, have gotten the help of the chief, but why are you alone? And Mo Yuan's expression was saying, although the strength of the people I brought may not be as good as Xiao Yang's, it is still much better than you, who got nothing. Gu Shun snorted coldly and said, if I hadn't miscalculated, you would all have to obediently admire me. As soon as these words came out, Mo Yuan and Song Zhongling smiled but did not say anything. Their playful expressions were also particularly serious, as if they did not believe his words at all. Seeing this situation, Gu Shun thought about how he had waited in the divine tomb for so long, but did not succeed in the end. He was very unhappy. Looking at the complacent expressions on the faces of his two fellow disciples, he felt even more uncomfortable. As for Chu Chengfang and Li Zheng, they also did not understand what these 3 fellow disciples were talking about, and felt that their hearts were in a mess. At the same time, they did not care. After all, the style of the Greenly world had always been a little strange. Xiao Yang and Han Fenglu, on the other hand, were talking and laughing, as if they regretted not having met sooner. If not for the fact that they were now in the middle of the divine tomb, they probably would have started drinking and chatting. Although what they said before was just some polite words, Han Fenglu's control of etiquette was very good, and she did not have the slightest arrogance to speak of. She looked at things with a normal heart, which made Xiao Yang admire her and feel that it was not easy. After all, there were really too few geniuses who could treat others with a normal heart. Therefore, it was very comfortable to get along with such a person, and there was not the slightest disgust in his heart at all. He even felt a little happy. After talking for a long time, the conversation between them finally stopped. My 3 fellow cultivators, it is fate that we met. Since we are traveling together this time, it is also considered as making friends. In the future, if the cultivators of the Greenly world are in trouble when we go out, I hope that you can lend a hand. Han Fenglu said indifferently. Brother Han, don't worry. I, Li Zheng, will definitely not forget the favor of supporting us today. When the time comes and we really meet, we will definitely lend a hand. Li Zheng also patted his chest and said happily. Chu Chengfang nodded slightly, because he might be staying in the realm of the gods all the time. If the cultivators in the realm of the gods met with trouble, they would probably have violated the rules, and he would not be able to help. Seeing this, Han Fenglu smiled, looking very satisfied. In that case, I thank you very much. But we still have to wait for a while to find the opportunity. I have to go and discuss with Princess Mingzhu and see if the two of us should travel together. Han Fenglu said. Hearing this, Li Zheng's and Chu Qingfang's expressions immediately changed. From Han Fenglu's words, they understood that Han Fenglu knew where Princess Mingzhu was. If they could really travel together with 2 9th-level mighty figures, it would not be a problem for them to do as they pleased in the Divine Tomb. In particular, Chu Qingfang was very excited, and it could be said that he was very tempted. If brother Chu Qingfang wants to find Princess Mingzhu, you can also come with me. Seeing this, Han Fenglu did not say anything, but instead was willing to help. Chu Qingfang was stunned at first, but then he shook his head and said, Brother Han, you worry too much. Since I have already teamed up with you, I naturally will not leave. It was not that Chu Qingfang did not want to find Princess Mingzhu, but he knew very well that with his strength, it would be very difficult for him to join the royal family's team. Therefore, now that he had Han Fenglu's protection, it was fine. He did not want to make a fool of himself, and then he would lose his support. The expressions of the other 3 did not change much, but because of this, their emotions changed. Immediately, Han Fenglu also told them what to pay attention to here, then left a map and left. If they could form an alliance with Princess Mingzhu, they could go even further. Chapter 1767. Xiao Yang looked at the map in his hand and frowned slightly. Han Fenglu's meaning was very obvious. That was Xiao Yang, as the strongest existence among the 8th rank, was not here. Naturally, Xiao Yang was needed to protect his junior brother and 2 companions. Moreover, some of the ink on the map had not dried for a long time. It was obvious that Han Fenglu had personally drawn it after surveying the surrounding terrain after coming here. It had to be said that Han Fenglu's strokes were also very good. Every sketch was just right, and it was almost exactly the same when compared. It was as if a piece of cloth was used to cover it, and it was copied like this. Han Fenglu was also a more meticulous person, because there were some marks on the map, and it was also clearly marked where there might be opportunities in the surroundings. But similarly, the range of activities of those dead spirits and tomb keepers was also clearly marked, roughly how strong they were or what kind of magical abilities they might have. Suddenly, Xiao Yang's heart was also somewhat emotional. This Han Fenglu, the degree of meticulousness of his thoughts was really difficult to look straight at. This kind of watertight thinking was even more admirable. If this person wanted to plan something, he would probably be a very terrifying existence, and it would be difficult for others to detect. When Han Fenglu left, he also said that it would take a few days for him to return. After all, it was not an easy task to find Princess Mingzhu. If they felt bored staying here, they could also follow the marks on the map to find opportunities. However, the 6 of them must also act together to avoid any accidents. If it was difficult for them to help each other, I'm afraid it would be really bad. From the marks on the map, Xiao Yang also found that the dead spirits comparable to the 8th rank, or even the 9th rank, were scattered in many places. But at the same time, there was also a pattern. These dead spirits were also separated by dozens of miles from each other, forming a natural territory, and there would be no disputes. It must be a very normal thing to form such a situation, and there were many possibilities. Those undead had some territorial awareness, so within their range of control, they would never allow other undead to appear. That was why they were pushed aside. After countless years of evolution, the strong had occupied the great rivers and mountains, while the weak, dead spirits fled in all directions. Therefore, it was only in the outer circle that the situation they saw before was formed. The more he studied the map, the more Xiao Yang admired the number one disciple of the greenly world. Indeed, not only was his cultivation profound, but he also did things perfectly. If there was a matter to be handled by such a person, it could be said that it was very reassuring and there would not be the slightest bit of worry. Song Zhongling saw that Xiao Yang was engrossed in studying the map, but he didn't say anything. He laid on the ground, bored, and didn't say anything. The large saber was stabbed into the ground beside him, and it looked exceptionally sharp. On the other hand, Mo Yuan and Gu Shun seemed to have a good relationship. They were chattering non-stop about some interesting things. However, most of those were childish things they did when they were young. Even though Chu Qingfang and Li Zhang were well-mannered, they couldn't help but laugh when they occasionally heard it. However, those two didn't care at all. They talked among themselves and didn't seem to care at all about the opinions of the people around them. Occasionally, they would chat for a while, which was considered to be a way to get closer to each other. The few of them chatted quite well, and they learned a lot about each other. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, would occasionally reply and didn't take it too seriously. Now, all his attention was on the map in his hand. Because this was Han Fenglu's painstaking work, there were too many things on it. Of course, Xiao Yang also wanted to have a better understanding of this world. So much so that he had a clear understanding of it. And this map happened to be the best choice. Seeing that Xiao Yang was completely immersed in the map, Chu Qingfang and Li Zhang were also a little surprised. However, in their opinion, there might be differences between monsters and geniuses like them. Therefore, they couldn't understand it. The few of them were very tactful. They didn't disturb Xiao Yang and let him study it by himself. He might be able to find some clues, and they might be able to get some benefits because of it. After a while, Song Zhongling really felt too bored, so he took out a few pieces of meat and began to roast them. Let me tell you, Junior Brother Song's roast meat is superb. The two of you are in luck this time. Seeing that, Gu Shun also rubbed his hands together. Obviously, he was looking forward to it. Even Mo Yuan, who had always been indifferent, had a slight change in his expression at this moment. Really? Li Zhang asked with some expectation. Obviously, he was also a foodie. Song Zhongling didn't raise his head and said, "You'll know in a while." "Then we'll wait and see," Li Zhang said. The few of them didn't care about Song Zhongling and continued to talk about some interesting things in their respective worlds. Their feelings also changed subtly. After a while, a fragrance assailed their nostrils. Immediately, Chu Qingfang and Li Zhang were full of praise and looked forward to the appearance of the delicious food. At that moment, the fragrance made Xiao Yang unable to continue watching in peace. Instead, he stared at the delicious food that was being cooked over the fire with greedy eyes. Seeing this scene, Mo Yuan and Gu Shun nodded their heads in approval. Looking at this shining junior brother, their gazes also changed a little. When Chu Qingfang and Li Zhang tasted the delicious roast meat, they were also full of praise. They said that it was simply a delicacy, and they couldn't stop thinking about it. It was a pity that they couldn't drink here. So everyone felt that it was a pity. Otherwise, it would be even more enjoyable. Hearing this, the two of them could only express that it was a pity. They felt that after leaving the divine tomb, they must find Song Zhongling to experience it. After tasting the delicacies, Xiao Yang once again immersed himself in the map. He also felt that there seemed to be something in there that was attracting him. He wanted to explore it and see why. After a long time, Li Zhang felt a little bored. He didn't know when Han Fenglu would return, but it didn't seem to be a good idea to keep wasting time here. He felt very sullen. Immediately, he looked at Chu Qingfang. It seemed that their thoughts were the same. The two of them smiled faintly. Chapter 1768. Fellow Taoist Mo, it's not the end for us to wait here. We don't know when Brother Han will return. There's not much point in wasting time here. Li Zheng spoke first. His tone was relatively gentle, and he did not show the slightest dissatisfaction. Beside him, Chu Chengfeng kept silent, but his mind was also on this. Moreover, with their cultivation, it was impossible for them to stay here for too long. It could be said that there was a limit to one's strength, and there was no way to borrow the power of heaven and earth here. If they could be saved, they could only leave gloomily. Instead, they would waste a good time, and the loss would outweigh the gain. Hearing this, Mo Yuan raised his eyebrows and said, "Fellow Taoist, if you have any thoughts, just say it. Why do you have to be coy like a girl?" Hearing this, Li Zheng was speechless and even felt a little uncomfortable. However, thinking that as long as they did not waste time here, it was not a big deal. If they lost the opportunity because of their reputation, it was not a good deal, and they could not do it. "I want to go for a walk and look for opportunities," Li Zheng also said firmly. After saying what was in his heart, he seemed to feel much more comfortable. They cultivated painstakingly and went through layers of battles to come to the tomb of the god of sin. Naturally, they wanted to get a great opportunity, then soar to the sky and raise their status to a higher level. If they were to do nothing and achieve nothing, then what was the point of all the hard work they had put in before? Gu Shun did not speak, but his eyes fell on Xiaoyang. Since their eldest senior brother had given the map to the Grand Competition's champion, it was obvious that he wanted the Grand Competition's leader to make the decision. Mo Yuan muttered to himself for a moment. He did not say anything as he looked at the person holding the map. Instantly, Li Zheng and Chu Qingfang also understood that the real decision was still made by the strongest among them, Xiaoyang. It could be said that if they encountered any great danger on this trip, he still needed to stand up and solve it. Being looked at like this by everyone, Xiaoyang was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes quickly wandered around the map, thinking about where to go. After all, waiting for Han Fenglu to come back was really boring. Therefore, it was not impossible to do something now. Perhaps if one's luck was good, one might even be able to obtain an incredible cultivation method. If no one has any objections, then let's go to a mountain 100 miles to the east. There's an undead spirit that's close to the 9th step. Although it's a little troublesome, the 6 of us should be able to kill it easily if we work together," Xiaoyang said nonchalantly. He put down the map in his hand and stopped looking at it. Hearing that Xiaoyang had not only made a decision, but also chosen a place, Li Zheng and Chu Qingfang were very happy. Gu Shan was also somewhat astonished. From the looks of it, this chief of the Grand Competition was indeed different. In such a short period of time, he was able to properly plan everything. He was indeed extraordinary. "It's all up to Brother Xiao," Li Zheng immediately replied. Xiaoyang slightly nodded his head as his gaze landed on the other people. Chu Chengfang had the same idea as Li Zheng, so he naturally did not have any objections. Therefore, it all depended on what the leading Greenly world had in mind and what plans they had. Gu Shun and Mo Yuan were thinking about this and felt that there was no harm in it. They also wanted to go out and find some opportunities. Although it was not a sure thing, there was nothing wrong with trying their luck. The boorish man saw that everyone's eyes were on him, as if waiting for him to make the decision. He immediately smiled awkwardly and said, "Since no one wants to stay here any longer, then let's go. Moreover, Mo Yuan has a magic weapon. When Brother Han returns, he can use it to find us." Although Song Zhongling wasn't sure, the current situation wasn't something he could change. However, he thought that with his 2 fellow disciples here, it would not cause too much trouble. Therefore, there was no need to worry too much. As long as they were careful, there would not be any trouble. "All right, since no one has any objections, then let's go now." Xiaoyang tidied his clothes and patted off the dust. Chu Chengfang and Li Zheng had been itching for a long time, so they were also looking forward to it. At the same time, they trusted Xiaoyang's judgment and felt that with him leading, their luck would not be bad. Then, Xiaoyang took the lead and flew at the front to lead the way. Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng, who could not wait, followed closely behind. They did not seem to want to fall behind, afraid that they would miss something. The three fellow disciples from the green-ly world also looked at each other. Then they looked at each other and nodded, then followed. Since the situation was like this, they could only follow. Moreover, they were now allies, so they naturally had to discuss things with each other. No one could make a decision alone. Unless you were an almighty of the 9th level and could lead everyone with your own strength, and there would not be a situation of disobedience, then you could make a decision alone. Here, strength was respected, and it could be said that this was vividly demonstrated. When Han Fenglu was here, he was the leader here. But when he was not, then Xiaoyang had the final say. Xiaoyang was the champion of the grand competition, and was an almost invincible existence among the 8th level. If they did not listen to him, who would they listen to? Although Li Zhang and Chu Qingfang heard from Xiaoyang that the dead spirit strength was close to the 9th level, they were not worried in the slightest. Because there was someone trustworthy, they had nothing to fear. Of course, since Xiaoyang chose that place, there was a reason. Because that place was specially marked by Han Fenglu, so one could imagine what it was like. Moreover, it was only close to the 9th level. Lei Dingyin, who had reached the 9th level, could even fight against it, let alone the dead spirit. Even if these people stood by and did nothing, Xiaoyang could defeat it with his own strength. Of course, this was impossible. With their help, it would be easier to defeat it. They could hold back. But if they wanted to stand by and do nothing, it would be tearing up the verbal agreement. The distance of more than 100 miles was less than half an incense stick's time, and they arrived. With a slight sense, they could sense that there was a powerful aura in the mountain. Presumably, that was the dead spirit marked in Han Fenglu's map. It had a strength close to the 9th level, and ordinary 8th level would not be a match for it. They would retreat at the sight of it. Chapter 1769. At this moment, Chu Changfang, Li Zhang, and the cultivators from the green-ly world landed one after another. They also sensed that their opponent was in the belly of the mountain, and his aura was extremely powerful. At the very least, they knew that if they were to fight alone, they would not be a match for him no matter what. However, they were not alone. There was a total of 6 people traveling together. Moreover, there was an abnormal existence like Xiaoyang among them. Therefore, they were also fearless. Since they had come, there was nothing to be afraid of. On the other hand, Song Zhongling seemed to be a little nervous. He held the saber in his hand long ago, and the muscles on his arms were directly exposed. No one knew if he was traumatized by the previous battle with the whites or something else. Xiaoyang frowned slightly. Seeing that the people around him seemed to be waiting for him to give orders, he felt a little uncomfortable. After the whites come out, don't care about anything else. Just kill them directly, Xiaoyang said indifferently. It was just a whites that was close to the 9th level. In Xiaoyang's opinion, there was no need to make a big scene. If it were not for the fact that they were here, they could have killed them with lightning speed. However, sometimes they could not be too sharp. Chu Qingfang and Li Zhang glanced at each other and understood each other's intentions. They quickly flew into the sky and hovered in midair, ready to attack at any time. Gu Shun and Mo Yuan also immediately stood in their positions and quickly mobilized the spiritual power in their bodies. This time they had to kill him in a single strike, so as to prevent him from causing any trouble later. Moreover, time was of the essence, so there was not much point in fighting with them. In the face of an opportunity, their battle experience seemed somewhat insignificant. Except for Song Zhongling, everyone was ready. Xiaoyang also knew that this boorish man walked the path of toughness and did not seem to be good at dealing with whites. Therefore, he did not say anything. Suddenly, with a flip of his palm, the Thunderfire Divine sword appeared in his hand. When this mid-grade sage-level magic weapon appeared, everyone's eyes immediately focused on it, and they were extremely envious. Who would have thought that the prize of being the champion would be so precious? It made people drool, especially when Gu Shun saw the Dharma artifact. There was a look of resentment on his face. Clearly, he was not convinced. You ants dare to challenge me? You're just courting death." Immediately, an ancient and hoarse roar came from the belly of the mountain. It was extremely fierce and domineering. In an instant, everyone's minds were shaken. Clearly, they were affected by the loud shout. That was why their minds were unsteady and they appeared absent-minded. However, Xiaoyang did not do that. In an instant, he saw a cloud of black fog rise up, and the dead spirits that had been hibernating in the mountain rushed out. The deathly aura that was emitted seemed almost tangible, and it looked a little frightening. How could an undead that could occupy a place here be so simple? Very quickly, Xiaoyang locked onto the body of the undead spirit. With a cold snort, the divine sword in his hand immediately emitted traces of lightning, which was especially dazzling. In a flash, Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng also woke up. With a loud shout, they also attacked. Suddenly, two tyrannical forces came crashing down. The two forces accurately bombarded the body of the undead spirit. Immediately, the cloud of black fog began to shake violently. It was obvious that it had suffered a great impact, which was why it was like this. Before the undead spirit had time to curse, Gu Shun and Mo Yuan unceremoniously took out their magic weapons and directly collided with the black fog. The black fog surged, and it was even a little shaky. Under the joint attack of the four people, it seemed that it had no power to fight back. These four people were all able to enter the divine tomb. They could be said to be the strongest among the 8th level. How could they be underestimated? However, when the black fog blocked all four forces, the sword aura that blotted out the sky and covered the earth rained down. The sword chi was like thunder, extremely domineering and killing evil. Immediately, the black fog completely dissipated, and the undead spirit that revealed its true body was cut apart by the sword chi. The power of thunder and lightning directly destroyed the fragments. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the sword chi completely destroyed the soul of the undead spirit, and it dissipated from this world. Chu Qingfang and Li Zheng also turned their heads to look. No matter what, they never thought that Xiaoyang's strength would actually be so powerful. With just a single sword strike, he was able to scatter the soul of an undead that was close to the 9th step. Although the four of them were enough to seriously injure it, it was still difficult to determine the result with one strike. They could be said to be very surprised. They did not expect that although they were all 8th level, the gap between them was so huge. It made them feel very helpless and speechless. It could be said that they also found it difficult to accept such an outcome. The difference between heaven and earth was probably nothing more than this. Even Mo Yuan's expression changed. He originally thought that if the Greenly realm had not given up, many people would not have the chance to stand out. But now it seemed that Xiaoyang's title as the champion was really deserved. Only Gu Shun's expression was a little different. He even thought to himself, if I had that mid-grade saint-level magic tool, I could also achieve the same effect. I might even be stronger than him. But this was just a thought. If it was to be put into practice, who knew what would happen? Song Zhongling was a little surprised at first, but then his expression returned to normal, and he even felt a little proud. Seeing this, Li Zheng said with some emotion, "Brother Xiao really lives up to his reputation. I didn't expect that in such a short time, your cultivation has already reached perfection." Regarding this, Li Zheng was also extremely envious. To be able to have such strength, exactly what kind of opportunity did one need to have to be able to achieve this? In Li Zheng's opinion, the previous rumors were probably wrong. Chu Qingfang also witnessed the battle of the champion with his own eyes. At that time, he felt a little sorry for Shen Luo. He was so close, but now it seemed that his loss was not undeserved. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently and then put away the Thunderfire Divine Sword. The reason why he could be so relaxed could be said to be a great help to the Thunderfire Divine Sword. It just so happened to restrain the attributes of the dead spirit. Brother Zhao's combat strength is really unparalleled. We are very impressed, Mo Yuan said with emotion. Xiaoyang waved his hand and said, Let's talk about these flattering words later. Who knows when Brother Han will come back? It's more important to seize the time to comprehend. With that, the 6 of them directly flew into the belly of the mountain.